Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the September 20th, 2021 meeting of Operations Work Group. I am calling this meeting to order. Chris, Ananda, can you guys hear me okay? Excellent. All right. So we have no public input tonight, neither written comments nor public appearances, and we don't have any minutes to approve tonight, so we can jump right into the agenda. We have a full agenda tonight. And a common theme running through most of our agenda items is that they require action, either in September or in October. So I'm hoping that this will be a very focused meeting where we can really prepare ourselves to be ready to vote when the time comes on different aspects of what we're talking about tonight. And for the next 2 months, this will be the focus of Operations Work Group. We have a lot of decisions coming up, such as the final budget. We are reviewing a number of very, very important policies for the district that we will be voting on. And so our time tonight is in preparation for those votes. And our goals tonight are about two-way communication, both to get board feedback on what we're talking about and also to get questions answered from the administration and get the information we need to make informed decisions. So an overview of what we're going to talk about. We will get a facilities construction update tonight, and that piece does have no action associated with it. It is just informational. Then we will get an annual cash flow borrowing update from Ross, and that has a vote next Monday. We will then go into mandatory vaccinations for COVID-19 for staff, and that also, I believe, has an associated vote in a week. Then we will go into policies, and I just want to make everybody aware that we have some pretty intense policy discussions tonight, and this may take, it's not going to be a 5-minute agenda item. So we want to make sure we're timing ourselves so we have plenty of time to discuss the 4 policies on the agenda. First, we have the addendum to the BEP, which we discussed last week, and that we will vote on in a week. And then we have a budget transfer policy, the surveillance policy, and locker room policies. And those 3 policies are up for a vote at the end of October.
May we move those up further in the agenda? Is that possible, Chair?
I'm not going to do that because I don't know. I'm assuming the people who are presenting to us tonight have time their logs about where they are. So I just want to make sure we facilitate so we get to those in a timely manner. At the same time, we want to make sure that everybody gets the information they need and their questions answered. So on that note, before we launch into this meeting, Dr. Jenkins, would you like to say anything to set the stage?
Yeah, Ms. Carrizzi, I think you laid it out for what's going to happen over the next 2 months. And so therefore, I think you're going to be, in the public, and everyone's going to be very pleased with the presentation that's coming forth. And those that are for action, we've had previous discussions on them, but we're going to continue to provide the information. We're welcoming all questions. I think these are some really serious topics, as you have laid out, and we are prepared to try to be as efficient as possible. Before the presenters come up, they'll let you know if they're for action or if it's just for information. But I think you already articulated the order in which we're going to see them at this time. So thank you very much, and we're going to try to be very efficient. Presentation should not be going over 10 minutes, and then after that, we're going to allow the time for appropriate board discussion.
Thank you. And whenever possible, it would be great if when the administration responds to questions from the board, if just one person could give the response. If it's necessary to have more than one person, that's fine, of course. But thank you. So our first agenda item is the facilities construction update. Our most recent facilities updates have focused on the 4 comprehensive high schools and Capitol High. However, another major benefit of the facilities referendum is that we were able to free up some of our regular maintenance funds to invest in maintenance and improvements we needed in our elementary and middle schools. Tonight's facilities update will show how the referendum has had a positive impact on many of our schools. I believe we've had 41 projects this summer. Is that correct, Dr. Jenkins?
41.
41. So in addition to the work that we're doing on our high schools and Capitol High. Again, this is purely informative, and there will be 2 pause points in this presentation. We'll pause briefly after the summer project highlights just for any quick clarifying questions, and then we'll have more time for questions and a more in-depth discussion at the end of the presentation. So, Brandon, I think you're leading this one, so take it away.
I think we're going to kick off with Mr. Hodo.
Or kicking off with Mr. Hodo. Thank you. Yeah.
To Brandon.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, well, good afternoon or good evening to the entire team, to the board members, to members of my fellow colleagues and friends. I want to thank you for this opportunity to present to you the facilities update. Barb, if you want to pull our slide up right fast, if that's possible. And while she's pulling up the slide to our board members, we'll go over briefly for you right fast. Tonight's presentation is a team presentation by myself, Brandon, who's our Assistant Director of Facilities and Maintenance, as well as Alyssa Brown, who's his architect assistant, and we'll be presenting this over to you. We're sharing an update as we go to the next slide, please. Today, we're sharing an update on the summer projects, the facilities referendum projects, as well as a referendum construction timeline that we thought is also important in keeping pace with this phenomenal opportunity for us. Next slide. If we take a look at the referendum key objectives, they're anchored in the philosophy that every school will be a thriving school that prepares every student to graduate, ready for college, career, and community. Our superintendent's vision of working together every day to make sure excellence is the reality for the student has become really the focus of our entire team. Next. If you take a look at the core values, building services is rooted in our core values, anchoring in the pillar of excellence. We have before you a brief presentation that will provide a glimpse of the summer achievements, as well as update of our 2020 referendum, focusing on every key strategic value, core value that you see here, but with a key laser focus on excellence. Next. We had a busy summer. If we want to take a quick look at some of the things that we've done before I transition over to Brandon, we had over 41 summer projects, all while working with MSCR and our summer schools curriculum team. We also did this managing to keep available space for our community partners as well. We'd personally like to publicly and personally thank our former building services director, Chad Weezy, for his diligence and guidance, particularly teeing this up for us for the summer. I'd like to also thank Brandon and his team for pushing this across the finish line. As we take a look at the long view, we see that there's a glimpse of what is needed to accelerate future summer projects, as well as remain laser focused on improving the conditions of our buildings. I'll pause for a second here and let Brandon take over, providing you a little bit in-depth detail of some of our summer projects. Brandon.
Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to run through some of the highlights of the 41 projects that we completed this summer. We remodeled 32 public restrooms, making them fully accessible and providing touchless fixtures. We replaced a steam boiler system at Kennedy Elementary with a more energy efficient hot water boiler system, along with a complete LED lighting and ceiling upgrade, which reduces energy significantly. Malele, Chicasa, Nana, and Hugel Elementary also received an LED lighting replacement upgrade. And then Toki Middle School, Orchard Ridge Elementary, Spring Harbor Middle School, Whitehorse Middle School, and Schenck Elementary are all in the process of updating the dated and failing salmon sea green corridor wall tile with a warmer, more timeless porcelain tile design. Next slide. Muir, Lapham, and Van Hise Elementary Schools received roof replacements. Lapham Elementary received a long overdue pool remodel. Leopold, Lindbergh, Blackhawk, Gompers all received flooring replacements in select rooms and corridors. And then MCA Elementary also received a new exterior refresh and a gym floor replacement, along with Cherokee Middle School. The list continues, but these are just a few of the schools we were able to touch due to the additional money, as Chris had said, freed up due to the referendum addressing the high school deferred maintenance needs and federal funds received. Next slide. Here, you see a few pictures here of the transformation to the, you see Lapham's Pool to the upper left existing, and now the completed refresh. And then in the lower photos, you see the restrooms kind of in progress of being remodeled. And then the lower left-hand corner is the some of this corridor wall tile that we are in progress of replacing. Are there any questions before I move on to the referendum update?
And I think it's one more transition slide.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Brandon.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, next slide. Here's a photo of the LED lighting upgrades. So off to the left, you see, varying color temperatures, some bulbs out, and then to the right, you see what a difference it makes. Consistent light distribution. I mean, through this, we ensured that we had an even light distribution and appropriate lumens for a learning environment. And there is, as I said, a significant increase in energy savings from this. Okay, any questions from this before I move on to the referendum update?
If you're online and have a question, just go ahead and chime in. Fabian, I see your hand, so.
Thank you. One of you all, well, thank you for the presentation, and I love the new lighting aspects, making our environments more inviting and welcoming and warm. Can someone walk through the process for prioritizing projects such as these?
Yeah, sure, Fabian. So we have a very big super saturated spreadsheet of all our schools, and it's basically a facility condition index. About 20, I think it was 2011, we did a kind of a condition assessment, grading all our schools, and we input, and we've been maintaining this spreadsheet. We've actually been maintaining since late 90s of the existing age of our buildings and the condition of them, and that, along with, so when, like, for example, for roofing, when roofing warranties are up, that raises a flag that the roofing is in line to be replaced. Along with that, our work order system. Our work order system is a great indicator. That is our conduit to the schools, to the custodians, to tell us if there's anything that's in dire need of replacement. In the long range, our work order system, in conjunction with an appropriate budget, we can actually start doing preventive maintenance, and where the work orders, we're asking for things that are around the corner needing replacing instead of reacting.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Just curious, on the tile replacement, were they falling off or was there mold underneath? Exactly why were they refreshed, may I ask? I'm just out of curiosity.
Yeah, Nikki, that's a great question. Actually, it was triggered from getting work orders that, hey, this tile is falling off. It's becoming a chronic problem. And so that flagged it at a couple of the schools. And then we started looking at it and thought, man, what a refresh it would make, what a transformation it would make to change out these tiles in these schools, main corridors where everybody walks through, and these tiles just make it look dated. So by updating them, it just has completely transformed the initial experience of the school.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Chris or Gordon or Maya, do you have any questions?
No, I don't have any questions at this time.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, we will move on to the referendum 2020 update. Just providing a brief update on the referendum projects as we wrap up the design, and now we're starting subcontractor procurement. I'm going to hand it off to Alyssa, who is working with the design team to finalize interior finishes and furniture. Alyssa, next slide. Yep.
Perfect. We'd like to share a few images from the architects of the referendum designs to date. So first we have Capitol High with a rendering showing the exterior elevation addition on the north side of the Hoyt building. The addition honors the original character of the building, which in turn supports the personalized, individualized pedagogy at Capitol High. The upper right image shows the culinary arts classroom with a connection to the outdoor patio on the right. And on the lower left is the makerspace, which is being created in a newly enclosed space on the lower level. In each space, updated finishes and modern furniture support an intimate learning environment brimming with school pride, especially with those pops of Capitol Blue. There's a fundraising component to this project as well, and Cap High is well on their way to meeting the goal. Congratulations to the school for the $10,000 raised so far. Next slide. These are renderings for La Follette's new Welcome Center edition and the Fine Arts edition, as well as interior rendering of the new Commons. I'm particularly excited about these exterior shots. As a La Follette alumna, I know that presenting a contemporary, attractive building elevation along Flom Road will do so much for students' pride in their school. The enhanced Commons is airy, open to the cafeteria, and creates a gathering space for 21st century students and faculty. There will also be a complimentary fundraising campaign at La Follette, which will be hitting its stride this fall with the October Board of Visitors meeting. Next slide, and I'll kick it back to Brandon.
All right, thanks. I also want to note that you are seeing furniture in these renderings, but that's not necessarily the final furniture. We're still going through that selection process. So here you're looking at West High School, the new Welcome Center in the lower right. On the left, the athletics entrance off of Regent Street. And then the upper right is showing one of the new common spaces that we're sprinkling throughout the building. Next slide. And then East High School here showing the Welcome Center exterior, a little more developed. And then the upper right is the mall, completely renovated. If you recognize anything at all, it would be the wall sconces there. We're changing out those, we're keeping the wall sconces, but we're changing out the bulbs for a more consistent, warmer color temperature. And then with an eatery in the back corner there. And then in the lower right, you see the you see the cafeteria space, which is expanded and remodeled. Next slide. So this is Memorial. On the right is Memorial's old courtyard being enclosed and transformed in a new commons area, also creating a main corridor through the center of the building, which will improve wayfinding and decrease congestion. Then the upper left image is showing the enhancements being made to the current barren-looking Welcome Center by adding vegetation, benches, planters along the walkway, and more visual interest to the building itself, building facade with metal panels and windows. And then the lower left image is the addition connecting the Tech Ed building to the main building. And then the lower right is the Fine Arts addition facing Gammon Road. I also want to mention that the Memorial Fundraising Committee continues to hold a goal of raising about $20 million for a performing arts center for a future build out as the board approved in early summer. So stay tuned for exciting updates from Memorial. Next slide. Next slide here. You've seen this, but in its very crude form. So this is a finalized rendering of the exterior of Southside Elementary from Badger Road. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the existing buildings. So really, I mean, we're completely transforming the look of that space. So more developed interior renderings will be forthcoming as we finalize the design. Next slide. All right, and then this should look familiar to you as well. This is the overall referendum schedule, and I just wanted to recap on this, showing everybody that we are still right on track with our scheduled completion dates for Cap High and South Side in 2023, and then completion in 2024 for East, West, La Follette, and Memorial. Any questions regarding the referendum projects and the progress?
I think it's one last slide about questions. And Brandon, thank you for your assistance, and Alyssa. And that's it. This time we'll turn back over to Chris Carusi. Any questions that the board members might have?
Barb, could you take down the PowerPoint? Thank you. So, Sabian.
Thank you again for this update. I certainly love seeing some of the high school renderings, particularly La Follette. With regards to the contracting that Findorf is doing, can we talk about how their hiring practices for folks working on these projects align with our goals on paying a living wage and trying to hire more Black and brown folks?
Yes. Yeah, good question. So right now, we've gone through, first we've gone through the major mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection procurement process, which we did more than just a bid process. First, we broke it up by school to create opportunities for smaller contractors to take on the Hoyt School and Southside work. Which proved to be good. So like people like H.A. Pertzborn, not quite big enough to take on a whole high school, but they will be doing work at the Hoyt school, or Cap High School. So that's exciting. We worked with, I had meetings with the union reps to ensure that we were taking appropriate steps, that they had a say in like how we wanted to how to do this in the most fair way. So now moving forward, we got all our major mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection contractors. Now we have the one-offs, the structural steel, the concrete, technology, and then interior drywall. Those we're breaking up. We're having a meeting that Findorf is kicking off that will invite all the small local contractors and MBE, WBE businesses. And we're going to have just kind of a launch informative of here are the projects. Here's how we intend to bid it out. We encourage all of you to submit numbers for them and just kind of an open forum for questions. So, because it's just so it's not so intimidating. These big projects, they come out, and it's huge. You look at these high schools and it's huge, but if you break it down and you kind of have a more informal or organic conversation about it with them, I think we'll get better bid participation from the smaller contractors.
Got it.
Maya, and then Chris.
Yeah, thank you. So my question is right along with Sabian about ensuring that we are intentional about having Black and brown companies and Black and brown staff actually doing the work. And so is there anything to ensure? Because I know that sometimes what ends up happening, just from my work in the community and some of the development, is that some of the larger contractors are able to put in good numbers, right? Because they are larger and they typically are white. And so they have the funding to be able to provide and put in the numbers that may look a lot more better than some of the other ones. So are there any safeguards to ensure that we are having a diverse group of folks that we will choose? And if not, how can we help as a board to ensure that that happens?
Yeah, so of course, we're following board policy, which is 5% 5% variance to minority business or women-owned business enterprise. And I would challenge the idea that larger companies have an advantage, because actually smaller companies have very low overhead. And so if you break it into pieces they can handle, they will beat the larger companies any day of the week. So that's why that was my point earlier, talking about breaking it into pieces that the smaller companies can handle. We're also doing a local impact. When we evaluated the larger mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection, we had not only points for being minority business, but also local business and the local impact. So if they've contributed to the community in any way, we wanted to hear about it. So those are the steps that we've taken. I think that it's reaching out, it's opening up these projects. If they're interested in the projects, there is opportunity here, no question.
Thank you for that answer. I just want to be clear that I just want to try to make sure that we are getting folks that are local, but also that we're focusing on, especially in neighborhoods like the South Madison neighborhood and such, where you have a large population of minority folks, and it'd just be really nice to see contractors build that school and have investment in the areas in which that they are living in. So thank you.
Yeah.
Great, Chris, then Ananda, and then Nikki.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for this presentation update. It's exciting to see the investment and the progress being made. One of my basic questions is, as we move along this timeline, is a lot of this work going to be done in the summer in the high schools where there won't be students, or are there pieces of this that will need to be done while school is in session? And then I'm wondering, I don't know if this is the appropriate place or not, or if there's more parts of this presentation, but an update on the West fundraising. There seemed to be some confusion about which pieces needed to be done at this final September deadline and which pieces could be extended into other fundraising like the other schools have done, like La Follette Capital Memorial has figured out how to do that. So if we could get some clarification on that, that would be great too.
Sure. So your first question, Christina, was what?
Oh, it was about if the majority of this work is going to be done during the summer when the students are not there, or how that works. Yeah, great question. So there is no way around it for this amount of work that we are going to have construction during the school year, pretty much year round. But we are working through in detail phasing plans that are part of the construction documents. So the contractors will have to incorporate, because if you can imagine, the more phases that you have, the more expensive that it gets. And the less you can put in, the more you're putting into, taking little chunks out, remobilizing, then you can put into the actual schools. So we want to hit that sweet spot of taken just a big enough chunk to where the school can still operate, and we're not interfering with the daily operations. So you'll see kind of in a general sense, the additions we're putting on the schools, those are first and foremost. We're hitting those hard and heavy. We got we already had some abatement projects this summer to try and get a jump start, because abatement takes a big chunk of time because you can't get other contractors in while they're doing that. So now we're able to hit the ground running come June of next year to start getting a big chunk of work
work done. But we are working with the principals at each school to make sure they're comfortable with the amount of spaces that we're taking throughout the school year, and yet they'll be able to still function. It's called surge space. So we're just kind of trying to find that balance of surge space at each school.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And then your second question was?
I don't know. Do you have another part of the presentation? Are we going to talk about the West fundraising effort and which projects are going to move forward and which ones are still part of the base footprint that won't be able to move forward, and sort of explain that?
Sure. So I can give you an update on where West School, as they were pursuing their fundraising efforts, and kind of as they were going, I think they saw that they were going to have a hard time hitting their mark by the time September 6th came along. So they focused their efforts on the pool, which did not surprise me. I know that's a very high priority for them. They did fundraise some money, not enough for the full amount. They got a commitment from a donor that does hit and exceed the full amount. I believe Chris noted to me that that needs to be approved by the board. That commitment, and it's not cash in hand, but it being a commitment, needs to be approved by the board. To be frank, is time is of the essence, because that the reason that was so critical is because that affects the footprint of the building. So if you can imagine, when you're in this phase of design, the building can't grow smaller, higher, like it gets super expensive for engineers to redesign their systems and such at this point in the game. So we'll have to, I guess, make sure that one is, I guess, figure out what we're going to do with that one.
Okay, just I guess my question was, is there any room for the components that sort of didn't make that baseline fundraising? I know, we're leaning into the arts are really important, and one of the things that was on there was the digital design studio. Was that part of the base footprint, or is that still a possibility moving forward as West continues to fundraise?
It is that one. Yeah, that one. We still have the space out for it, and right now, they still could fundraise for it, and that was not a big deal as far as design. Just kind of white box that until construction, that phase of construction comes around, we can decide.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it. And then so the track is the only thing or the extra, is that the only thing that is off the board right now, or is there any other thing that's not possible?
The raised track, and there was a kind of a fitness center, athletic, like an exercise athletic room, that was taken off the table too.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thanks for clarifying. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Great. Thank you. Ananda and then Nikki.
Yeah, thank you so much, Board Member Carusi. Thank you so much, Brendan, for this presentation. And thank you so much, Cedric and your team. I'm on the slide 13th for the Southside Elementary, and I'm trying to understand the picture a little bit. So there's a picture of the current building, and then there's a picture of what's going to be the new building. Is the current building the 10 building on the new sketch, the new design? Is that the correspondence?
Yeah, if you can imagine, see all the green space in the picture in the existing building?
Yeah.
That is all getting an addition. So we're building that red brick
Okay.
The fly out, the blind, like that's all getting built around this existing building. So you won't even see the existing building from Badger Road when this is done.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
there'll be something that's gonna come in front of where is now the cafeteria.
That's right. Yeah, the gymnasium and then classrooms, and then that's the library up top there in second floor.
Thank you for helping me situate. Can you point to where's children's drop off?
Yeah, we actually have a really good traffic. That's been that was a big part of our discussion, and the existing parking lot is getting completely transformed to where it's going to be a loop system to where you're dropping off. You have 2 points of drop off. One at that kind of at the front of the school for the elementary school students. I'm going to say there's a couple people. It's pretty much the entrance right under the library.
Okay.
They'll be able to pull right up there and drop their kids off.
Okay. And then the bus is going to be on Rimrock. The bus drop off.
Yeah, I think the bus, I'll have to confirm this. I thought the bus was actually going to drop off on Badger.
Okay. Because that's a really skinny road, as you know. You know what, I wanted to follow my own protocol around not getting granular around this. I mean, the reason that I'm kind of, I think, pulling apart some of those questions is because in the picture, it looks like it's a really large space, but the road is really, that Badger Road is really skinny. And there's a car dealership right across. So it takes like a lot of that space. Yeah. My biggest concern about the school and the location has been what's around, what are we doing in collaboration with the city around the bus stops and the signing and how we're going to get children to cross from Rock Road, all the safety measurements that needs to take account to, and knowing that I'm assuming it's going to be a very, very walkable school until the cold hits and we have snow, because one of the things that happen in the South Side, different than perhaps other places, we are often really late to get street cleanup. And so I'm assuming that there'll be a lot of sometimes even some of our bus stops don't get cleaned up. So, it's hard for children to standing there and waiting for a bus. So I'm really curious about like, how's that partnership going? And it could be just a side note if you don't have anything else to add.
Yeah, actually that's a great point, Ananda, because just over this last year, I think, as you probably know, with City of Madison annexing that space, you're already seeing signs of the city being more reactive to public issues like pedestrian crossing and traffic through that space. We've already met with traffic engineering and talked about how narrow Badger Road is. We've met with Metro. So we're working through with them. We want to make sure that, on both sides, that we're both comfortable with pickup, bus traffic, pickup and drop off there. I think I think just naturally with the city annexing that space, we are going to see some improvements. The town of Madison had 1 foot out the door, frankly. I think. Oh yeah, I know. From what I could tell there, we bought Holtzman too, and we kind of got to feel it firsthand as from that transition from town of Madison while we were doing that construction project to the city, and we could already see an improvement. So we are working with them. The architects are and civil engineer. We have specific meetings with the City of Madison traffic engineering and utilities and their pedestrian traffic to ensure that everything is going to be safe. We do have that bike path too, that I think now the city will be able to maintain that, which they are, I can attest firsthand that they are really good about maintaining their bike paths. So I think that'll be an improvement as well.
That's really hopeful. Thank you so much. One of the things that I would love to get included, as I think you mentioned, the impact of the rollout of implementation and from multiple aspects. So I really appreciate that. I think one thing that is particular about the Southside Elementary is impacting another elementary school, right? So I think it would be really cool to bring forward as the progress is going, to make sure that we also understand what's happening at Alice. And for me, some of the points of curiosity is, I'm curious of how much the demographic is already changing and what's gonna look like from an accessibility, socioeconomics of the school, all of that, because yeah, I'm just really curious about like how the Southside Elementary is impacting Nuestro Mundo.
Yeah. I for what it's worth, I know that we have regular engagements with Nuestro Mundo. We had, well, I think, you know, we had the walkthrough at Alice with them and responded to some of their questions. We have some improvement projects in the queue over there and in response through that walkthrough. So Nuestro Mundo be more comfortable with the transition there. And then as far as the Alice group, yeah, we've been engaging with the community over there, with our rooted partners that are tenants in the South Side or Badger Rock space. And we're going to continue to hold community information sessions on progress of the building, and then get further community input and how we can better help that community too when we move in there.
Thank you so much, Brendan. Thank you so much, Board Member Carusi.
Nikki?
Yes, just want to elevate minus point of Black and brown businesses and also add something. I know there aren't a ton, but there are some small companies that are run by individuals with disabilities, whether they be small masonry, small tile and that. If there are any that are interested, can we possibly try and see, at least do a reach out, if that's possible, or is that too late for that? If it is, I understand, and we can focus on it at another time.
No, not too late at all. That's absolutely great idea. Nikki, if you had a list in particular of contractors, we can reach out to them specifically and invite them to this meeting that I was referring to.
I'll get that to you.
Thank you.
I appreciate that, and thank you again.
You bet.
Maya? Do you have another question?
Yeah, just one quick question. Brendan, are you guys in talk with Dane County? And I say that because in South Madison in particular, they are creating the destination space at the Coliseum over there, where they are looking to bolster that area to be a destination spot of Madison, in addition adding a bunch of housing. I know I've spoke with some folks on the board about this before individually, but they're also looking, the city of Madison is looking to tear down the bar there, the Coliseum bar, and build an 18-story housing construct, in addition to possibly having a couple more of those at that magnitude and that size. And so I just wanted to know if you are in conversations not only with the city, but Dane County to figure out how that will affect the Southside school, because one, it might increase the enrollment. Two, it will definitely increase traffic and yeah, so just was wondering.
Yeah, that's a great point. To this point, I am not aware of any conversations we've had with Dane County, but can certainly reach out to them. We were inadvertently a part of that Coliseum Bar planning by moving out of the Olin building when we moved Neon and Next Steps out. So I think that's part of the development over there.
Yeah, I just would probably reach out to Dane County, because that will definitely change a lot of plans. And to Ananda's point, board member Ananda's point about, just traffic and little ones getting to school safely and such like that. And there's a lot of talk of just throughout the city about just development in general. But in South Madison is a prime space as a corridor now to Madison as a whole. And so there's a lot of development going on. So yeah, if you can talk to Dane County, that'd be good to see like how that may affect your plans. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Gordon, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say to make sure that you consult those in the communities and conduct your own future predictions of enrollment. As one of the board members have said, we might see an increase in enrollment down the line. So just make sure that our schools are able to hold the increase in enrollment. Because as we see now, a lot of schools are overcrowded again, and class sizes are starting to heavily increase. So just make sure that we don't run into those problems in the future, because we can do something like this, continually within a short time span. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, great point, Gordon. I know I just for peace of mind, I know we've had our planners forecasting and did projections on, over the next 10, 20 years of what our enrollment is expecting to be. Southside was a tough one, had a lot of moving targets on that one, but we do have some projected enrollments that we're basing it on. Yep.
Any other questions? None. I would like to conclude just with a huge thank you to Brandon. Tonight is Brandon's last meeting with us. He's moving on to another opportunity. Brandon, I want to thank you personally for the work you've been putting in for MMSD for years, the work you put in to make this referendum project a success, and the leadership role you have taken in this project in the past few months. We're really going to miss you, and we wish you all the best and all the best luck as you move on in your life. And also want to thank Cedric and Mike and Alyssa for the leadership that they are taking to keep this project moving forward, keep us on schedule, and to continue to do great things in our district. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Chris. I will be rooting you on from the sidelines here, watching the referendum.
All right. So before we move on, we've had some suggested changes. First of all, we did have somebody who wanted to speak, who came in late, and so, and secondly, we have several guests from our medical advisory group who are here for the presentation on vaccination. So, Barb, do we have to vote to move things up, or can I just do that? We'd like to move the vaccination presentation up and let our speaker speak. So.
I'm comfortable with that, Chris. Thank you for being considerate of our medical advisors.
Yeah, I don't
know. We get to have this really important conversation. I think you, as the chair, are making the right call.
Okay, thank you.
I happen to agree.
Same here.
Okay, Barb, would you be willing to let our speaker into the room at this point?
Speaker's in the room.
Excellent.
His name's Sean Kruger.
Hello, Sean, whenever you're ready.
Hi, can you hear and see me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm reaching out because I'm from West High School parents, had a couple of kids go through, and I had identified that I'm representing myself, but I'm really not. I'm speaking for a lot of parents and students. This was kind of late notice. But we were informed that there was not going to be a homecoming dance at West. And I have discovered that that is the same for all of the high schools that are part of MMSD. And I guess we feel that more information should be provided, and we have a general disagreement, I guess, with that decision. We will be the only schools out of all of the Big A Conference and the Badgerland Conference not offering our students a homecoming. And after a year and a half and all that that has brought with it of their losses from high school, we think that this is really something that we don't have to say no to. It can be done safely. It does not violate or would not violate CDC, Dane Public Health, nor any MMSD guidelines. The students could be outside and masked. Also, this sort of puts the students in the place where they'll then make their own plans. And this gets into the question of equity, because you're going to have a whole bunch of kids going off and making their own arrangements. Some will have their own dances, which honestly, I think also promotes not necessarily making healthy choices. Whereas in an organized dance, all of those things could be taken care of. We could make sure that kids are masked. We can make sure that they're making good decisions. So I guess what we would like to know is, why was this decision made? It doesn't really bear out from the science. There are 80,000 people at the Badger games, and it's not even required that they mask when sitting in the seat. It's encouraged. So this isn't consistent with public health guidelines. I'm 100% supportive of vaccination. I am big on masking. I think the students would say, okay, fine, we can be masked and we can be outside. But this seems to be taking away something that is very substantial and special, and it's been a long year and a half for students. Seniors will never have another homecoming dance. Freshmen from last year, now sophomores, never had one. And a whole group of parents, there are going to be a lot of kids who are probably going to be taking action against this. Don't see why we need to say no on this particular endeavor. I don't know if any of you have any information as to why, but I do know that we're the only school right now out of, I don't know, we're looking at like 20, 30, including all of the rest of the Dane County schools, who are not going to allow a homecoming dance. So I guess that's all that I had to say. I would love to hear any input that you might have. And I think this will be a big issue for kids, and you'll be hearing a lot more about it.
All right, well, thank you, Sean, for your comments. I will note that we're not actually noticed to talk about homecoming tonight, so we can't respond to your comments, unfortunately, and be within the law. But okay, this is a topic that our medical advisory group could potentially take up, and we could talk about it at a future time. So thank you again.
Okay.
Appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on, we're going to take up the vaccination, the mandatory staff vaccination piece at this point. At our August regular meeting, the board approved a resolution calling on the administration to present a plan tonight for mandatory staff vaccination for COVID-19. We will vote, I believe we're going to vote to approve this plan at the end of the month. Is that correct, Dr. Jenkins?
Correct.
Okay. And the goal is to center the health and the safety of everybody in our schools and our broader community, while acknowledging that vaccine fairness and equity are pervasive issues that we need to understand and address in our planning. We want to take the time that we need to discuss concerns and answer questions tonight to prepare for this vote. And I want to give a big thanks to our medical advisors who are here with us tonight to help us prepare for that vote. So on that note, are you going to start, Dr. Jenkins, or is Leah?
I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Esser. I just wanted to also echo your comments about our medical advisory group. I talk in the region, state, and nationally, and we really has second to none, a medical advisory group. And I'd just like to say the collaboration that's taking place between the individuals in our district is also just awesome. And so thank you to our medical advisors, and thank you to Dr. Esther for stepping in and the leadership you've been providing here with Nurse Wendy. So Dr. Esther, if you would take over at this point.
Great, thank you so much, and you took the words right out of my mouth. I'm joined today with Nurse Wendy Smith, who is our Assistant Director of Health Services, along with Dr. Ellen Wald and Dr. Greg Demary, who are our health advisors, or two of our health advisors. So thank you all for being here and being with us tonight. I have the pleasure of opening up the conversation about mandatory vaccinations, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nurse Wendy to talk us through the concrete plan for vaccinations in MMSD. So since we've returned to, go ahead and get the PowerPoint up, Barb. Thank you, I appreciate it. Next slide. Since we've returned to school, we have already been requiring layered mitigation strategies to keep our students and staff safe and decrease interruptions in learning, prevent classroom and building closures due to COVID-19 outbreaks. As a school district, we have an obligation to ensure a safe and healthy learning and work environment. And quite simply, vaccination is the most powerful and effective mitigation measure that we have at our disposal. Keeping our scholars safe from COVID-19 has always been a priority, but now, given the increased transmissibility of the Delta variant to children, we're further obligated to ensure safety. Moreover, we must recognize that our students' worlds extend beyond school, and ensuring our staff are vaccinated, we will help keep our students, their siblings, their grandparents, their neighbors, and those they love and care about safe as well. Next slide. In Dane County, we have approximately 70% of our eligible residents who have had at least one dose of the vaccine. While we are significantly ahead of the state national average, still about 30% of our residents remain completely unvaccinated. And none of our scholars under the age of 12 are yet eligible for the vaccine. As the Delta variant continues to wreak havoc, we must continue to promote the vaccination, and in this case, promote mandatory vaccinations for staff. Next slide. As we look at our data, it's important that we also look at demographic data and data broken down in different ways. COVID-19 has had disparate effects on communities of color in Wisconsin and across the nation. According to the Wisconsin Department of Health and Human Services, compared to white residents, Hispanic or Latinx residents have 1.7 times greater case rates. Black residents have 2.1 greater hospitalization rates, and American Indian residents have 1.5 times greater death rates. While overall in Dane County, there are 73% residents who have had at least one dose, only 43% of our Black residents are vaccinated. In our country, Black people are subjected to structural racism, and there are additional barriers and obstacles to becoming vaccinated, and this is no different in our community. Becoming vaccinated as a school district, however, is not just a commitment to student safety. It's a commitment to anti-racism. It's a commitment to public health, and it's a commitment to human rights. Ultimately, it's incredibly important. And as a school district, we have the ability to contribute to positive and greater good. At this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Wendy Smith, who will talk about our layered mitigation efforts. And then she will go into our overall plan for vaccination here in MMSD. Wendy, you can take it over.
Perfect. Thank you, Leah. And then I just want to also send a thank you out to Dr. Wald and Dr. Demary for being here. We are so grateful for them and their expertise in all of our venues. So thank you both for being here. We thought this would be a good opportunity to just review what are those layered mitigation strategies that we are already doing, and then adding in vaccination as a continued or a layer on top of that, the layers that we're already doing. So our success in school against COVID-19 is what's keeping us physically present in school and learning in person. The number of positive cases that we are experiencing in school correlates directly with what we are seeing in the community. But with our layered mitigation measures, which as you can see here, vaccination being one of them, prevents us from establishing close contacts. We're better able to keep students in school and teachers in school. So though we'll be spending the rest of our time talking about vaccination as a key mitigation strategy, we wanted to just remind everybody, these are those core mitigation strategies that we're already utilizing and keeping in place. I think the very last one we've gotten questions on, so just to clarify, what is contact tracing and isolation and quarantine? So anytime there is a positive case, the lead nurses and the nurses within the district are following up with everybody who was potentially a close contact. That close contact definition is defined by the Department of Health. So school nurses and MMSD are stewards of public health. So we are completing those close contact tracings to ensure, as Leah mentioned, to ensure that we are keeping our grandparents, parents, community members safe and continuing to mitigate that spread within the community and within our homes. So the close contact definition is anybody who is within 6 feet of a parent or an individual who is positive. The exception being in a K through 12 classroom, we have that 3 feet exception because that's where studies were done. Also being within that 3 to 6 feet window, any direct physical contact with the positive person, so kissing or hugging, handling the positive secretions, or living in the same house. So anytime there's a positive case, the nurse or the lead health nurses are going through and doing that close contact with every single person to ensure that we're doing the safest thing for our students in our classrooms in order, again, to keep our schools open. Next slide, please. We want to focus this entire presentation on leaning forward together with our 4 pillars. So equity, excellence, humanity, and intentionality. And we've really done all of this work focusing on vaccination mandates around these 4 pillars. Next slide, please. We'll start with excellence. Next slide. So proposing mandatory vaccines. For planning and research, we obviously consulted with our amazing health experts, so thank you to them, reviewing literature as well as learning from other systems. And then cross-functional teaming. So we pulled together a team from health services, human resources, technical services, our partnerships group, communications, operations, legal services, MSCR. As you can imagine, this touches many, many aspects of MMSD, and we wanted to make sure we had a comprehensive group that was looking through everything. And so we are pleased to present to the board the progress we have made thus far on our vaccination plan. Next slide, please. So our expectations for vaccinations: all current employees must show proof of full vaccination status by November 1st. Employees may request either a religious or a medical exemption. Those employees that meet either a religious or medical exemption must submit to twice weekly COVID-19 testing and documentation. And I do just want to call out, we have gotten this question that is different than what other organizations are doing. But again, leaning on our medical experts, this is what the safest thing is for our students and to ensure that we're not having spread in the classrooms. Moving down, all new employees must show proof of at least 1 dose of vaccination before starting employment. And then the second dose would obviously be within whatever that expected timeline is. Partners and volunteers will be required to be vaccinated to work in the schools. And then the district to develop expectations for visitors in phase 2 of our vaccination plan. Next slide, please. So this includes all MMSD staff, including MSCR staff, partners and volunteers, really anybody who is working in school in person with our students. And again, focusing in on what is going to be the safest thing for our students and the safest thing to keep our schools open. Next slide, please. And our goal is to have all eligible staff fully vaccinated by November 1st. Which I think is an awesome goal to have, knowing that this is what we need to do as one of our mitigation strategies to keep our schools open. Next slide, please. Moving forward to equity. Next slide. So assessment of our current needs. So what we're doing right now is working with our informatics on building an application so that staff can upload confidentially their vaccination status or their vaccine status. The employee would upload that documentation. That documentation needs to be confirmed and verified that it is true and correct. And then as vaccine exceptions come through, or vaccine expectations are verified. So we would go through that. Next slide, please. Vaccine access. So in collaboration with SSM Health, we are hosting 2 vaccine events. This would be for the Pfizer vaccine as it is FDA approved. And those 2 dates correlate with how far between the vaccine dates that you have to go, as well as working with our SSM partners. We've recognized how vaccine rich Madison is. And so I think just making it fully transparent to our employees, really how many vaccine opportunities there are within our city and surrounding areas. So making them aware of public vaccination sites, so pharmacies, grocery stores, any pop-up clinics that we're having, as well as their healthcare providers. And then intentionally setting up these October 1st and October 22nd. We intentionally set these 2 dates up on Friday, as we had heard there were concerns with the side effects and staff losing, potentially not being able to be at work because of those 24 to 48 hour side effects. And so intentionally setting these 2 dates up on Friday so that staff would have Saturday and Sunday to recover from those side effects. Next slide, please. So vaccine hesitancy, I think this is huge, just getting kind of behind the why of why people may not want to have a vaccine. So centering the voices of the unvaccinated, using science and data to inform them, answering questions. We were able to collaborate with MTI and host, they're coming up actually in a week, host 2 vaccine Q&A events for staff with our wonderful medical partners, to have expert voices there just to be able to answer any questions that we have. If people have specific questions or really anything, it's just an open forum for staff to be able to come to. We are going to record those 2 events so that they can be replayed for anybody who may not be able to attend the 2 events, but we're offering a daytime and an evening event for staff. Next slide, please. So I think when we think about humanity, we need to think about those who require medical or religious exemptions, acknowledging that those are things that we must honor as employers. Next slide. So according to the CDC, there are 2 exemptions. So a medical exemption, so if you're at a risk for allergic reaction to the vaccine, or you have an underlying medical condition, or a religious exemption. And then any and all exemptions would need appropriate documentation. But I think just recognizing that the ADA and civil rights, Title 5 of the Title 7 of the Civil Rights Act, that we must recognize both of those just to honor our employees. Next slide, please. So testing for the for staff who have a medical or religious exemption, we are going to, as I mentioned previously, we are going to have them submit to twice weekly testing. We're still working out the details, but right now we're thinking it's going to be on Tuesday and Friday, in collaboration with our medical director, Dr. DeMurray, that those are dates that are far enough apart that they would be accurate. But we will be completing PCR testing, so not rapid testing, as that's a more accurate picture of what's going on and won't have a lower risk of giving us like a false positive. And then I think just to open it up, that we have our select school sites or strategic school sites that have the COVID testing, that staff are welcome to go there, or they're welcome to go to their any other venue that they're comfortable going to for that twice weekly testing. Next slide. Perfect. And then on to intentionality. Next slide, please. So just a timeline again. So proof of vaccination or request for exemption is due by November 1st. And again, this is for all employees that I mentioned previously. Confirm that all employees have submitted documentation by November 5th. Send notice of impending administrative leave week of November 8th. And then place employees on unpaid leave beginning November 15th. And then verification of vaccine documentation and exemptions by December 1st. So send notice of impending administrative leave week of December 8th. Place employees on unpaid leave beginning December 15th. And then notice of termination of unvaccinated and non-exempt employees week of December 20th. Next slide, please. So implications for school. So potential for vaccine or vacancies created by those who are unvaccinated and non-exempt. So I think just acknowledging that we have heard that and we recognize that that is a concern, and that is why we are working with our school partners and MTI to do as much as we can to address the why behind the vaccine hesitancy and how much we can support our employees prior to it getting to that point. Next slide, please. So potential budget implications. So all of those things I just mentioned have a lot of behind the scenes work. So I think just a little snapshot and to be transparent with some of the work that needs to be done to make this all work. But it's building an application for vaccine documentation submission. It's staff to confirm that submission, processing and managing those accommodation requests, sending non-compliant letters, processing administrative leaves and terminations, developing application to monitor testing for exempt, responding to requests for information, and then developing vaccination plan phase 2 as we move forward. Next slide, please. And then I think just next steps moving forward. So incorporate any feedback we get here tonight from the board and community stakeholders, continue vaccine promotion for students and families, and then any additional recommendations for mandatory vaccines. And then I think knowing phase 2 would also include visitors and how we will manage those. So expecting them to show proof of vaccination or a negative PCR test no sooner within 48 hours of coming to visit. And again, centering all of this back on leaning forward, knowing that we want to keep our students in school and keep our schools open. What is the safest thing for them? That is it. Questions?
Thank you, Wendy. Very much appreciate it. Before we move into board questions, Barb, can we take down the PowerPoint? And I would like to offer our medical advisors, if they would like to weigh in on this plan, just a minute or two to do that, if you wish.
Yeah, I would just like to say, oh, I'm sorry, Greg.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Yeah, I think this is a very, very thoughtful plan that they've put together, and I feel like I could strongly endorse it. There's been a lot of careful consideration of all the factors that are important.
Yeah, I too would just like to say hats off to Wendy and the health office and everybody who contributed. This is really well thought out. I've been involved with some other efforts like this in other places, and this is one that I think is really trying to do this very deliberately and incorporating as much humanity as Wendy used as possible. This is a great thing. This is administratively very important, and I'm very pleased the board recommended this at the last meeting. Of course, we all face the same mandates in our employment here in healthcare, so we're right beside the teachers now.
Thank you, Dr. Wald and Dr. DeMary. Let's move on to Dr. Jenkins and then board questions.
Yeah, I just think it's one thing that's really important. We talk about a collaboration at the board level, and I don't know if everyone realizes this. We have a board member sitting on our metrics team, and this board weighs in, and we've had many conversations. And as a superintendent, I am so appreciative of the support and the work, the way that you're digging in and raising questions. But Ms. Gomez-Smith is on the committee as well, and she represents not only herself, but the board and our community very well on that. So I just wanted to make sure I lift that in terms of the board, your support for this, as well as your communication.
Dr. Jenkins, all right, Nikki, and then Fabian.
On budget implications, you stated that there are some budget implications. Can we use ESSA dollars that we have to cover some of those budget implications so there won't be as much of a financial issue? And
Yeah,
I also have a
We anticipate all of this can be covered by just shifting ESSER funds. And some of the shifts are actually unnecessary because we've already planned for it. So yes, we anticipate everything will come from ESSER.
My second question, and this is not your guys' fault, this is the medical system's fault. Can we please disaggregate the data based on disability? Nowhere in the country does that. Instead, they say we die of disabling conditions. And it's pretty low when you don't even make the death rates in the nation. And if possible, if we could get that info and disaggregate it, I would be really happy just to know that humanity-wise that we do exist. That's all I have.
Nikki, that's a great question. We will look into what we're allowed to get as far as information and report out on what we can. Thank you for surfacing that for us.
Sabian?
Thank you. I got a few questions, rapid fire. One, do we have an estimate for percent of staff that are already vaccinated? Two, when we approve this policy or recommendation, will it include, vaccine booster shots that are coming up in the near future? And then three, definitely interested more in kind of the persuasion campaigns that we'll have to engage in to persuade or convince unvaccinated folks to get the vaccine. And so interested in diving into what types of resources those will entail.
Sure. I can start with the estimated staff. So the only data we have is from MTI, which I believe it was about 70% of their staff that they had estimated was vaccinated. Is that correct, Leah?
I think it was higher, but I thought it was at 85% because you quoted it so much lower. I don't want to say that definitively. I thought I was pretty confident, but I believe it was in that closer to 85% range where that was staff that would support a vaccine mandate. And so from there, we had to draw some conjecture and make some guesses about that additional 15%. But let us just confirm that because I would hate to misrepresent their data.
I think too, just their data does not include food service and custodial service. Is that a true statement, Leah?
Yeah, the data that they have is based on just their membership. And so there are folks that are in all sorts of employee groups that are their members, but it would not necessarily take into consideration the whole district. So we do have some blind spots here as it relates to how many of our staff are vaccinated or unvaccinated. But we are hoping that it's no more than 10 to 15%.
And then your question regarding boosters, I think is a great one. And we keep watching FDA and CDC and listening to our medical advisors to see when that is going to be approved. And right now it's not approved for the general public. And so I think it's kind of, for me anyway, and Leah, I think it's been kind of in the back wings of like, is that a phase 2? But nationally, I think all of the focus is on getting those people who are unvaccinated vaccinated first. And so I think that's where our focus needs to lie right now, is getting those people who are unvaccinated first. And then whenever that FDA approval comes through, we are working with the builders for the app on like, how would we then add in that booster portion of into the app to say, yes, I got the booster, or no, I didn't get the booster. But I think focusing on that initial 1 and 2 pokes is key.
Got it. Thank you.
And Wendy, could you talk about the vaccine hesitancy as well and the work that you're doing around that? I think that was Savion's third question.
Oh, yes, thank you. I knew you had a third one and I started to write and I didn't finish writing down, so thank you. So I think looking at vaccine hesitancy, so we have 2 dates set up next week with our medical advisors. Just a basic Q&A, and I have created a Q&A questions just in case people are quiet, but I doubt people will be quiet just because everybody has such awesome questions to bring forward to our medical team. But it is a 1-hour session with a variety of our medical advisors that basically is open forum that I will help facilitate as to exactly what questions you have, and it's any and all questions. And again, this was done in collaboration with MTI so that they can help pull in folks that have surfaced questions and vaccine hesitancy questions to their team, or from their team, I'm sorry. But we're hopeful that that will help address that.
Got it, thank you. Just to follow up, just to underscore how important those persuasion or Q&As are, that, you know, that there is a degree of cultural relevancy with those as well, in terms of talking to the different communities who may have not gotten the vaccine yet for a variety of reasons. And I did have one question that came to mind. For my employment with UW, I had to submit a proof of vaccination or do, you know, a similar deal here. They were able to cross-reference my vaccine documents with a state of Wisconsin vaccine database through DHS. Are we able to access that as well, just for verification?
Leah, can you?
Yeah, I can take that. So we do have access. Each individual has access to the Wisconsin Immunization Registry to check their own vaccination status. We do have, there is, essentially, we don't have permission to check an employee's access in the Wisconsin Immunization Registry at this point. What we are seeing is that some organizations are having people upload or provide their vaccination card, whereas others are seeking consent to check the vaccine registry on their behalf. What we're recommending is that the employee either submit their vaccination card or a screenshot or PDF of their Wisconsin Immunization Registry page and upload that. But we would not check that on their behalf because we don't have authorization to do that. I believe it requires a social security number in particular that we would not have on the ready to check.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. I guess offhand curious about the difference between us and UW, but
I think it's because of the access to, because the hospital setting has more access to your medical records and your health information, whereas we don't necessarily have that infrastructure and education.
Got it.
Chris, I see your hand, but first, Dr. Demiri or Dr. Wald, would you want to weigh in at all about Stephen's questions in particular on the booster and how that might fit into this plan, and also on access to where?
I can talk about boosters for a sec. So as you all know, the sequence of kind of national policy decision making on this is the FDA approves a vaccine for a certain use, and then CDC recommends it, or actually more technically, that American Council on Immunization Practices, which is the umbrella organization from the CDC. So a lot of this will depend on what kind of level of recommendation we get from CDC as to whether or not a booster would play into, you know, a mandatory type, a mandate, if you will. You know, clearly it's not going to be all that different from the FDA, so it won't be less than 65 and immunosuppressed, or and not immunosuppressed. So that part of it will be relatively easy. Down the road, though, there's potential that things could change on this, and that it might be important to integrate it into policy and mandates like this. But I think that's a ways off right now.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to everybody for the work that has been done in taking the resolution that we passed and transforming it into an action so that we get where we're going with this vaccine mandate. I guess one of the questions that I have is, we're doing a build out so that employees can verify their status. When do we anticipate that verification process will start? And then I guess functionally, do we have, or how many additional staff do you estimate that we're going to need to be able to do this, both from the verification standpoint and from the extra testing that might be required of staff?
Excellent questions. I can start here, Chris, and Wendy, please don't hesitate to jump in. So we anticipate we will begin. So our first step in verifying will be on November 1st when we compare the list of staff to the list of people who have submitted something. So our first check will be on November 1st or between November 1st and November 5th. Did everyone submit something? So our first round will be then connecting with the employees where we have absolutely no documentation or request for exemption. The second round of this work will happen then from November 5th through December 1st, where we are actually looking at each employee's verification of vaccination on the system. Wendy and I were brainstorming ways in which individuals in which we could hire that we could confidently trust with confidential information, and how we would handle that verification process. She encouraged us to reach out to our nurses and nursing assistants to see if there would be any interest in after school or evening extra work to complete this process where we would compensate them well. I will be honest, I wasn't sure. I thought Wendy maybe didn't have a very good idea. I'll just be really honest. And I thought that our nurses and nursing assistants would not be in a position where they could offer that option. They were very enthusiastic and eager and jumping at the chance to participate in this opportunity. And so we do want to weigh that and consider thoughtfully whether or not that's something that we can add to their plates, even though it is after school and they would be compensated extra. But to be quite frank, they're the people I trust most with this information. They're the people who have this information already. And if we can divide and conquer and do this really fast with a group of committed and smart folks, we might be able to pull this off in a record amount of time. So if you would have asked me that question last week, Chris, I would have had a very more hesitant answer, but we're very optimistic that we can do this in short order with our fantastic, completely dedicated team.
Okay, thank you. That makes me a little nervous just knowing how much is already put on our nursing staff. And I hear you on that, and glad everyone is enthusiastic to help with this. I don't know if support staff to do data entry or something could be added to help people with that piece, or I'll leave that to you guys, obviously, to creatively problem solve that. I just want to make sure that we have the people we need, because if we're going to put timelines and deadlines on people submitting this, we have to make sure our system works well and that we can get to all the information in the timelines that we're setting out.
Thank you. And I share your concern, and that's something that we're going to continue to navigate in the coming couple of days.
Okay, thank you very much. My other question is around, this is more of a board procedure thing. What exactly are we approving when we approve something next week for this vaccination mandate? Is it the expectations slide combined with the timeline slide, or are we actually needing to do a policy around the vaccine mandate, or how is this going to look when it comes back to us next week?
Dr. Jenkins or McGregory or Sherry, would you be able to take that one for us?
I'm going to have our council. Sorry, me, somebody's on. Sorry, that was me. Is this still on?
Yeah. There you go. Okay, I'm totally sorry. I thought I had put it on mute. But we're gonna have our general counsel speak to that particular question.
Good evening, everyone. I believe the actual resolution that was passed indicated that the board would be voting on the plan that is brought forward, which is essentially the presentation tonight. So it'll be put in a presentation format for the board at the regular board meeting, and that's what you'll be voting on.
Okay, Thank you for clarifying that. I guess I'm wondering if we can somehow condense it down so it looks like a plan that we're approving with the timelines and that sort of stuff. And it's not all scattered through a PowerPoint presentation. So something a little more condensed that we can then share on our website. So everybody knows.
It'll likely be in the format of the normal board memos that you get on items that you're going to vote on at the regular board meeting.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. And then
You're
my
welcome.
last question is for the medical advisors. I'm wondering, because the medical field is so far ahead of the field of education in mandating vaccines and getting your healthcare employees vaccinated, do we know how many vacancies have been created in healthcare by mandating vaccines?
I don't know. I know of any number across the board, but I think at UW, actually, it was a very small number of physicians, at least, who in the end refused. It was really less than 5. And that's a big system of 13,000 people. So,
okay. I would just hate to lose employees over this. We know that vaccines are crucial to keeping our community safe. And like Sabian, want to emphasize us getting the information to people how they need it. And making sure we're doing as much outreach as possible, because every one of our employees is important to the functioning of our schools. And we do value each and every one of our employees that works with us. So thank you.
Ananda?
Thank you so much, Board Member Carusi. Thank you so much for the medical team to be supporting and advising us along the way. My question actually is a bit different. My line of questioning is a bit different than what my colleagues have offered. And I'm not going to pretend to understand the technical pieces. And I am very sure that all around you're having people coming to you and say, I read this article or this research or blah, blah. So I'm going to be another person that's going to say that, but understanding that you all going to give me a lot of grace. But one of the many recent Harvard authored by Harvard School talked about the importance of vaccine, but also the vaccine is even in spaces where there's vaccine rates are in the 80s or in the 90s, people are still getting COVID. So I wanted to ask that question around the fact that we're going to be in the space of mitigations and masks and hygiene for a while, and the impact on that on our potential coming back to be in person in a much larger scale. And then my other question is it's around what are you all expecting? What's been some of the conversations with your colleagues around the cold season, which has been, particularly in Wisconsin, we get really intense here with our flus and our colds. And what is the impact of that on false people, thinking that they have COVID, not knowing? I know this is already happening in a much smaller case now because we had some really bad colds over the summer. But that's going to intensify over the winter months. And we are going to be all indoors, and our immune system didn't have a chance to build up, and all the other things that everybody already knows. But I'm really curious, how are you all talking about this? What are some of the ways that we can already prepare ourselves from a practice perspective? Or what is the impact of the long-term policy implication and the things that we're trying to do?
well, maybe I could just start for, excuse me, a minute, just to say that you're absolutely right that the vaccines are not 100% effective, but they're really very, very, very good. And so you reduce your chances of getting a serious episode of COVID or requiring hospitalization or dying when you get vaccinated. And so that's the reason that we do. Because we have such a highly transmissible variant now, the Delta variant, that it's just interesting how it's in everybody's language now. It's really a common word. Because it's so transmissible, that's really why we've gone back to recommending masks indoors, whether you're vaccinated or not. So those mitigation strategies are going to be with us. You're absolutely right. They're going to be with us for a while until we have so many of the population vaccinated that we really can reduce the circulation of that virus. And you're also right that, you know, there are a lot of different viruses in the community right now. And that is, again, why the masking is so important. And you absolutely cannot tell the difference between a cold caused by a common community virus like flu or respiratory syncytial virus and COVID. You can't tell unless you test. That is the only way. We know that sometimes people are actually asymptomatic when they're infected. Sometimes they just have a runny nose. Sometimes they have a more severe illness. You just can't tell unless you test them. There's no way to tell.
Yeah, I could just chime in quickly. Some of our colleagues at UW did a study on vaccination and found that you're 34 more times likely to be hospitalized if you're unvaccinated. I think you've probably all heard statistics like that, but this is local. And, you know, every child we've had in our ICU so far has been unvaccinated, including some older eligible kids. And as Ellen mentioned, you know, testing is going to be key to sorting out who's got the normal respiratory virus and who doesn't. There's a virus circulating right now in the community, mostly in younger kids, called RSV. That's just causing a lot of havoc and filling up hospital beds. But the way to get at that, as Ellen said, is testing. And for the board members, just so you're aware, the testing program is something that's being launched. And, you know, Wendy and Dawn in the health office are really at the forefront of that, at getting that off the ground. There's a lot of logistical issues that are tough to face, to navigate with that. And many schools across the state are struggling with that. But that testing program will be really imperative in sorting out some of these issues, really to have quick, accessible results so we can get kids back in school. Because if they're symptomatic, they're going to have to stay home till we get that result, and then we can get them back in school when the result is back.
Can either of you speak to also the impact of like colds in this now system that have not built up? Have been just really germ averse because we've been just swimming in like sanitizers and not with anybody else other than our nucleus. Like what is it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question too. I've been asked it a couple times and had some discussions in an online forum on it recently. And I don't expect any increase in cold viruses because of this. Ellen and I did a study on cold viruses a couple years ago, and it really, some kids get one, the average kid got one a year, and some kids got 9. And the factors that played out into that really seemed to be more individual genetic than they did to be, you know, environment, or, you know, whether or not that kid was in school or home, or these were a little bit younger kids too. So some of them were in daycare. You'll be absolutely fine if you never get a cold your entire life and you stayed home. That's not going to be harmful to your immune system. On the other hand, getting multiple colds a year is very, very common, right? We all have been through that with ourselves and with our kids.
Thank you. What are you seeing in regards to policy around, and I'm dealing with this in multiple aspects of my life, and in you know, I'm MSD. I mean, right now we're in this hybrid space, right? I'm making my decisions are like, if I absolutely don't have to be in person, I'm not. That's for everything, right? Like shopping, anything, eating, anything. Are you all like Dr. Waldo, you mentioned like the impact of Delta on a lot of those policies, but like, are you all in this space of like, if you don't have to be going to a restaurant, don't go to a restaurant. If you don't have to be doing XYZ, don't do it, because every time you do it, it's you exposing yourself. Are we still in that conversation? Has that lesson? I know there's also another letter of the alphabet, the Greek alphabet, that is going around. God knows how many others that we're going to be exposed to, but yeah.
I think that we have to still be very cautious right now because people who got vaccinated early, we know we are seeing some breakthrough infections. We're seeing them, in the elderly, and we're seeing them in the immunocompromised, and we're seeing them in some healthcare workers. All of the groups that were immunized the very earliest are the folks that we're seeing the breakthrough infection. So my hunch is that boosters will come along for all of us. Right now, almost certainly they're going to be recommended mostly for the elderly and for frontline workers. But I think for the meanwhile, while this virus is still circulating so vigorously, that we should be cautious and wear our masks and not do things that put us in close contact with others who may not be as cautious as we are.
And everybody's got different risk tolerance too, right? And that's kind of key. And a lot of these are value judgments. You might have a very important wedding. It's your child, your parent, your spouse, whatever, brother, sister, and that could have a lot of value to you. And maybe there's a way you can do that safely. You want to really go to that. On the other hand, my adult kid went to the Bucks. That big gathering in front of the stadium during the playoffs, and I lost my breath over that one. He's okay, but I was not happy.
I'm with you. Okay, lots of my friends were with your son, so I'm with you. Thank you so much, Board Member Carusi.
Nanda, any other questions? Gordon, I want to give you a chance to speak if you would like to ask anything.
No, I think you all are doing a really good job when trying to manage this and keep us all safe in the building. So I just want to thank you all for that. And, just continue to do your thing.
Gordon, so I have a couple questions to close this out. And Ollie, did you have one?
I greatly appreciate our medical advisors for joining us this evening. I think we've really deep dived to this conversation as it applies to our staff. And I think the larger conversation is, what to do for our students who are unvaccinated. So I appreciate the mitigation strategies that we continue to embrace and that our medical experts emphasize this evening. Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you for your questions.
And Maya, I'm sorry, I didn't ask you if you had anything to add. So I had a couple questions. One question is about hourly employees, and I'm just wondering if the requirement to go out and get vaccinated could put an undue burden on employees who are paid by the hour and might potentially have to miss work to go get vaccinated.
One of the things that we committed to on this, that no one's going to lose wages from it, particularly our hourly employees. That came up right away. And in fact, I want to thank Mike Jones, who brought that up right away, but we were all in agreement about it. This has been a true collaboration.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And my second question is, Sherry, I really appreciate the clarification that we're voting on a plan next week. But does this change have any implications for board policy or the employee handbook?
Our general counsel will speak to that again.
And we have a board policy on TB testing. That's information.
No, not at this point, Chris. I don't know. I know there's the policy about TB testing, but I don't know if, given the current stance, if that's something we want to do or need to do at this point, because things are constantly changing. And I don't want to put the board in a posture where we're always revisiting the same issues over and over. I'd rather wait to see where it's going to land, even in the next couple of months, to determine whether or not it would need a policy change at this point.
Thank you, Sherry. I really appreciate that clarification. And on that note, I want to start by giving Dr. Wald and Dr. Demuri a huge thanks for going above and beyond and being with us tonight and for answering our questions and sharing your wisdom and your research and with us. Thank you so much. I also want to thank Leah and Wendy and also every nurse and nursing assistant in MMSD who's working day and night to keep everybody safe. So thank you for everything, including this presentation, but so much more.
Thank you all.
Right.
Thank you.
Shall move on. We're going to go back to the annual cash flow borrowing update. This is an annual ritual in MMSD because we don't get our money from the state until January, I believe, and school starts, essentially in August when our employees come back. We always have a cash flow gap. And we have two ways to fill that gap. One way is with our fund balance, and the other way is with borrowing. So Ross is going to talk to us specifically about cash flow borrowing. We will be voting on this in a week. Ross, thank you for being here.
You bet. Good evening, board members. Glad to be here again. In your materials for tonight, I put together a memo, which our comptroller, Natalie Rue, who's also here tonight, helped put together. We are going to be bringing a resolution to the regular meeting later this month to do some cash flow borrowing. As Chris very correctly stated, this is an annual ritual for Madison and all other school districts, frankly. Since we have approximately a $500 million budget, it is true that we do not get all of our money to execute said budget on July 1st. In fact, our major two sources of revenue being from taxpayers in the forms of tax levy and general aid from the state come well into the school year, such that when we get to certain points of the year, we find ourselves literally out of cash. Those low points occur roughly the same time each year, usually right around the beginning of October and again towards the end of January. For this resolution, we've been working with PMA, our financial advisor, and our bond counsel with Quarles and Brady to secure an award of this TRAN note or tax revenue anticipation note to bring on the regular meeting on the 27th. The sale will be on the 27th that morning, so we'll bring that resolution to you live that night. For this school year, we're going to be looking at a short-term borrowing of approximately $50 million. The way these short-term borrowing issues work is we get the cash when we need it at this point in the year. And then this point, 12 months from now, we pay that exact sum money back. And we'll be back to you again next September to request a new amount to do this all over again. This is mostly a mechanical exercise. The good news is in our ratings call we had recently, we got the Standard & Poor's highest rating possible, S&P 1+. So we are in a very favorable condition to do this type of borrowing each year, and it has a very positive impact on the types of interest rates we receive each year. So with that, if there are any questions, I just wanted to make sure this was in your materials for tonight, as I didn't want to just spring it on you at the end of the month. And since this is a relatively new process for me in this district as well, I wanted to make sure we had the chance to talk about it together. So if you have any questions, please let me know. And Natalie is here as well if you have other questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm wondering if Ross or Natalie, if one of you could just talk us through what happens next Monday.
Sure. Natalie, do you want to walk through the award process?
Coming off. Good. All right. I was trying to get unmuted. So Monday morning, we will go to market, and actually Quarles and Brady's and PMA will handle all of that. We will go to market. We will get our list of bids, and we will take the lowest interest rate possible and the best outcome to the district. And then at that point, when we accept that bid, that bidder will actually transfer a good faith payment to us saying, we're serious, we're buying, transfer a good faith payment to us. It's just a little bit, but it's a token to say, yeah, we're buying. So it's a few $100,000. It's not a little bit, but it's a little bit. To say, yes, we're buying. PMA will get, and Quarles and Brady will put together the final official statement with all actual buyers, dates, dollar amounts, bidders, and send all of that documentation at about 10:30 to Barb to get into your board material so that you know who is bidding, what the rates were, and that we're getting the best rate possible for you to approve for that borrowing.
Thank you, Natalie, for that great blow-by-blow of all the action that will be going down on Monday. Much appreciated. And the takeaway for the board is that we will not actually have the materials to review for this vote until probably midday on Monday before vote that evening. So
it's the same every year with this. Yeah. It's stressful. It's not optimal, but that is the process, I guess. Thank you.
Are there any questions from the board about this? All right, seeing none, thank you so much, Ross and Natalie, for getting us ready for that vote next week and for putting together such an informative memo.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. All right. On that note, we will move on to our policies. So we are talking about 4 different policies tonight. We're going to take them one at a time. We're going to start with the addendum to the BEP that would put a moratorium on suspensions pre-K through 5th grade. We talked about those at last week's instructional work group meeting, and we're scheduled to vote on this addendum next Monday. Because we discussed the broader issues around suspensions last week, I'm really hoping to focus the conversation tonight on the addendum. If anybody has questions about the addendum or commented at the addendum or wants to see changes to propose, now is the time to do that. Is somebody going to actually talk about this for a minute? And then, okay.
We're going to have Dr. Esser start off, and she's going to give it to Brent to get into the very specifics you just spoke of. Dr. Esser.
Great. Good evening and hello again. I'm delighted to be here again tonight with you to talk about the elimination of out-of-school suspensions in grades 4K to 5. Last week, as you know, we proposed this moratorium on out-of-school suspension at elementary schools, and today I'm here to bring you the language for this proposed addendum to the behavior education plan. I did just want to take this opportunity to spend a quick minute summarizing what we've learned from schools over the last week so that I can just lift their voices in this space as we make this incredibly important change. As we shared last week, we surveyed elementary principals and we heard from over 30 people, and I just want to elevate their voices. As we move forward in proposing this addendum, we are thinking about how to make this change a reality. And in doing so, we need a more cohesive staffing plan and teaming structure. So as we move forward in implementing, provided the board approves this change, we'll engage in comprehensive allocation planning for next school year related to student and staff support department positions, including a clearer role definition for PBIS, culture and climate, and behavioral education assistants, all while also tending to and thinking about the operational components of a school. While we're not able to make those adjustments at this time of year, we recognize that this change is happening midstream and our schools have needs that are timely. And our team from a central office perspective is really ready and planning to support schools in a meaningful way right now. We will also continue to focus on foundational practices and support our schools in that way. And most importantly, our schools are telling us that they need targeted support for those limited incidents that in the past would have led to an out-of-school suspension. So if the board chooses to move forward with this addendum, I can assure you that our intensive support team is organized and ready to support schools to address individual student needs. We're ready to partner with special education staff as needed as well. We also have comprehensive threat assessment protocols and staff dedicated to supporting schools to address both immediate and long-term student needs. We'll continue to support schools to partner with families with an emphasis on communication and connection to community supports. We will also continue to deepen our restorative justice disposition and practices associated with restorative justice, supporting from central office and helping schools to navigate complicated situations that arise that would benefit from restorative action. And finally, we will continue to build and support meaningful alternatives to suspension. So as I close, I just want to express my appreciation to the board for continuing to model anti-racism and your unapologetic efforts to eliminate inequities and dismantle systems that disproportionately impact our Black and Brown students and our students with disabilities. I am confident our team is positioned to support schools and we are ready to make this change. At this time, I will pass it over to Board Member Carusi, and she can lead further discussions or questions.
Thank you, Leah. Are there any questions from the board? Ollie.
Leah, as we identify alternatives to suspension, if we see that those alternatives are disproportionately being utilized or leveraged to correct the behavior of students of color, that students of color continue to be the most likely students to be sent out of class, the most likely students to be labeled as disruptive, the most likely students to receive the most extreme punishments available. What is our plan for addressing that? And the other question is, I've heard that about 18% of our teachers make up the vast majority of our referrals out of class. So what kind of professional development are we providing to teachers who are really struggling with behavior management or with classroom management?
Great questions. And I just want to make sure that I captured them properly. So the first is really around how do we monitor and how do we ensure that our students aren't ending up in other systems where we're pulling them from the class. Yes. Hang on, other data, and then.
Great. And I'll go this far, Leah.
Yeah.
I'll even say, if we are using restorative justice, but disproportionately, Black students are the students who are being referred to restorative justice, what are we going to do if the racial disproportionality continues, but how we address it changes?
That perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that question. My notes just went missing, so that's what I was trying to buy a little time for. I'm just going to speak off the cuff because I know the answer. So I think I mentioned this last week when we met. We can hypothetically pat ourselves on the back and say that we've eliminated disproportionality and out-of-school suspensions at the elementary school level. However, we know that out-of-school suspension is only one area of discretionary decision-making that we face in any given day when addressing a student's behavior or perceived misbehavior. And so for us to simply remove the option and not think about all of the other systems that students could be diverted to in a negative way would be very short-sighted. So we need to be looking at referrals to restorative justice and the proportionality related to that. We need to be looking at the use of seclusion and restraint. We need to be looking at the use of in-school suspension. Frankly, we need to just be looking at, are there alternatives that are being used more frequently? So we now have created the opportunity for ourselves to look at other data points and analyze them in a different way. What we can't do is just move our exclusion to a different system or a different way of packaging our approach. So ultimately, we are now accountable for looking at multiple data sets and thinking about the system in a more comprehensive way so that we're not just deferring our students to a different type of discipline or, a dressed up version of what we've been doing all along. So that's to your first question. To your second question, I think we have to have serious conversations about what staff need in order to help students to be successful in the classroom. As a department, we are taking a step back and a step forward very quickly at the same time, looking at what we have spent our time on for professional development in the past. Developmental designs is a high leverage strategy, for example. We need to understand who is trained, how those strategies are living in schools, and what more we need to do to ensure what we see as high leverage training and professional development is living within our schools. So developmental designs would be one piece of that. Also looking at nonviolent crisis intervention, in particular, the proactive systems that we put in place and what we do to help de-escalate behavior. Thinking about mindset, and the mindset that is associated with restorative justice and restorative justice practices. In many respects, I will be honest, talking about professional development in this way is attempting to solve a values problem with the program as well. And so I just want to name that and put that in the space that we also have significant work to do around race and equity and how we see our students and how we present to them each and every day. So there's foundational mindset work that has to be done with staff. in addition to those concrete practices that we can use to help promote positive behavior in the classroom.
Yeah, I want to thank you so much for speaking to that. And I guess I want to add just a couple of comments, which is one, a few years ago, one of my students in Foundations of Leadership said, tab out, if you all are familiar with tab out, when a student is removed from class and put into another class. And my student described that as humiliation and isolation disguised as care. So our students have a pretty sophisticated understanding of the different ways that they can be treated really poorly, and we can, exclude them without excluding them. The second thing I want to say is, under the Student Code of Conduct, the #1 reason a student would face an in-school suspension was insubordination. During the BEP, the #1 reason students have faced in-school suspension is dishonesty. The students we are most likely to try to dominate and distrust are African American students. And our data shows not that African American students are more likely to get in trouble for, violent behavior or deeply dangerous behavior, but that the relationship between our African American students and their teachers is strained and continues to be strained. And so repairing that dynamic and repairing those relationships has to be part of this work. And I think that means creating an atmosphere in which our educators are deeply supported in their own growth, but also have the resources available to them, including, having additional support in the classroom and within the school in order to set folks up for success as we do this. And I mean, set our students up for success as well as our educators. And so I really hope we're thinking through what that looks like. I don't think it is an option to continue to disproportionately use suspension to harm our disabled students and our African American students and our students who sit at the intersection of disability and gender and sexuality and poverty and disability and race. Thank you for answering my questions, Leah.
Thank you. Ananda and then Nikki.
Thank you so much, Board Member Carusi. Thank you so much, Leah, for the presentation. I am in full support of this change and this recommendation. I'll reiterate, I'm looking forward to see what's going to happen for middle school and high school. My comment, I wanted to elevate what Board President Mudro mentioned in regards to the small percentage of teachers. Sorry, my internet is unstable. The small percentage of teachers that overrepresent the ways in which we continue to show up disproportionality. I think what I recommend is like a sharpness around noticing what's going to be the practice that is going to exclude our students that identify as Black, Brown, and students that have IEPs, because that will happen. It has happened with restorative justice, as it has happened with tabs, and it has happened with many other interventions. It's just gonna look different when we're doing when we're moving this policy forward. I think there needs to be a really attention draw to the teachers that potentially do not align with the vision and mission of the district around being anti-racist. You can't say that you are an anti-racist teacher and only put tab outs on Black children and only suspend Black children over and over again. That cannot happen in our school district. You can't seclude students, and say that you are anti-racist. We need the practice needs to hold what we're happening. And I wanted to say this really explicit, that until we reconcile with that and something actually happens where, like, no, you can no longer be teaching students when you are overrepresenting the number of educators that are secluding and restraining students with IEPs, or Black students or Brown students. That cannot be happening in our school district. And we have not found ways to be really honest
with ourselves. I have 13 years with the school district, or a little bit of over 13 years with the school district, and been a part of many different relationships. And I have heard horror stories from different educators, and it just upsets me that the small number of educators are constantly bringing those just horrible experiences for our students and our families, and nothing happens. And at some point, we're just gonna have to say, like, enough is enough. I really hope that 2021 is enough. On top of experiencing a global pandemic, now we're making Black and Brown students and students with IPs also continue to deal with tremendous racism in our school. That has to stop. And we have the data, we have the numbers, we have the plans, we have the intellectual muscle to figure this out. And I'm really curious of, like, what is going to stop us to actually move into action. And I am certain that all my colleagues are also ready to move into whatever direction that's going to address the systemic issues that we have noticing, we have observed, and we have kept track for many decades now. So I really sincere hope that we are watching out for the next practice, that we're going to see the racial disproportionality, and that we really tackle this issue around knowing that an educator is not in this aligned with their, with our district vision around being anti-racist, and just moving them from classroom to classroom, to school, and not really addressing adult practices to the degree that we need to. Thank you so much.
Nikki?
Yes, I can tell you what the next practice is going to be, that you're going to see overpopulation of minorities and individuals with disabilities. It's going to be shortened day. What you're going to see is more and more shortened day waivers are going to be done. They're going to be an option either through the IEP, or they're going to be an option through the juvenile justice system, even though Judge Mitchell has spoken out against it quite adamantly. And unfortunately, that's probably where it's going to happen. I would almost positively agree. So I do not want to see the numbers there. And if I do see the numbers there, then unfortunately we'll confirm the suspicions I already have.
May I add, Board Member Vandermill, and also recommending students to go virtual.
Oh, yes, good idea, good point. Yeah, and it's going to happen. You're right. And that terrifies me. I want to get rid of seclusion restraint. I want to put this moratorium on suspension, but I don't want to create just a Band-Aid. I don't want to do more than that. Now, what I want is a realization that every child should be able to learn, and that everyone needs to do what's in the best interest of the child. Second one, of course, is up for debate on a lot of things. But if we're going to do what we are put on this board to do, or in our schools to do, it is we need a plan on when we see these numbers creep up. Do we increase the professional development? Do we start asking what is going on, or do we put another meeting? Because I don't just want another meeting, I want an actual explanation. I don't want to be here a year from now. No offense to anyone. I've worked on seclusion restraint for 17 years. I don't want to take another 17 to get it to actually do, to eliminate a practice that should have been eliminated a heck of a long time before that. Because it's cruelty, it's child abuse, and it's not right. So before I drone on forever, all I just want to say is this. We need to be vigilant on how we treat our children, and also we have to be aware that if those numbers creep up, this is what's going to happen and why, and we immediately have to address it.
Adrian?
Thank you for the discussion so far. Really, thank you, Bren and Leah, for your work on this presentation. And, to Board Member Vandermillen's point, you know, through our country's history, I don't know if you've read Cass, but white supremacy has a way of morphing and evolving, and certainly we got to stay vigilant about that. I remain hopeful because we have Dr. Jenkins, Dr. Pryor on the job here, Dr. Stanford Taylor. So I guess I kind of have a direct question. You know, so when we look at the data, it's primarily Black and brown students with disabilities who experience suspension. I do not believe that Black and brown students with disabilities are inherently more of a threat to the classroom, disruptive in the classroom, insubordinate in the classroom, this, that, and the third, for the reasons for these suspensions. I don't. So what does the professional development look like for staff who seem to have a hard time understanding that? You know, what does that professional development look like? What more resources do they need, for example? And, you know, at what point, you know, are we going to realize, like, how much money are we spending on this professional development to try and get people to show growth? And if there is no growth, at what point, what does accountability look like?
Sabia, that's an excellent question. I'm going to start and then I'm going to ask Brynn to jump in if she has anything. One of the things, so as I'm returning to this role 3 years after vacating, I'm doing a lot of systems analysis and trying to understand the impact of our actions. And so, Savion, I think your point is well taken, is in the sense of like, what is the professional development that will move our needle, that will change things so that we're not continuing to have the same conversation again. And as I previously asked the question, continue to name additional programs that will have great benefit. But really, ultimately, what we have to do as a universal department within my overall student and staff supports team is really look at the impact of our actions and think about what the highest leverage activities are to get the greatest impact. And I just frankly don't think that we've reached that sweet spot yet. And that's something that we are prioritizing in the coming week or two moving forward. We need to have a clearer picture of what the roadmap is to become an anti-racist educator who is capable of implementing this level of systems change within the classroom and within school systems as a whole. So it's an excellent question. I don't think we have the exact answer, and that is our number one charge moving forward with this change. Brynn, is there anything that you could add, having been in the department for the last several years and being able to speak more definitively to the work that's been happening, so I don't misrepresent anything or underestimate the important things you all have been doing?
No, thanks. I know it's a tremendous obligation to try to capture others' work. So, you know, I think these are, again, just to pull us back, like to be in a district where we're making this move, willing to make this step, and willing to ask all these questions at the same time about the unintended consequences and plan ahead so that we don't go down that road, right? Where we're just doing some of the things that you've all named, that we have to be on high alert so that we don't do that. And I think one of the things that gives me hope is looking actually at the data that I've had the opportunity to share with you all a couple times back in 1920 on our use of alternatives to suspension in middle and high. And we watched that very, very carefully to make sure that alternatives to suspension were being offered to Black and brown students at the same rates that they had been offered, given, imposed out of school suspensions, right? And so we do have practice watching our data week by week to make sure that we're not seeing unintended consequences. We have a really long list here, right, of things that you all have spelled out. And we know that's a critical part of system change is we make the bold changes that we need to, we lift up best practices, and we watch for unintended consequences. So I feel like we're in the right spot to make this move. And honestly, we can be one of the leading districts in just to have these conversations about adult mindsets. Like I don't have, a huge framework on the professional development piece in general, but I can say some of the work that we've been able to do just with the restorative justice team and others in our department in terms of really digging in with school staff and empowering them to lead professional development in their schools around accountability, adult mindsets. Some of the incredible speakers that are coming to the Racial Justice Summit are speakers who we've been watching and reflecting on all of us, right, together and sort of leading as department leaders too, to say, let's reflect on our own mindsets. Let's do that with school staff. Let's support them to do that with their teachers. That gives me hope. And there's no easy answers to where we go with this, but I feel like we're asking the right questions. And I think we've laid the groundwork to go where we need to go.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, I just want to underscore that, we're going to invest a significant amount of resources into adults to change their mindsets. And I guess I just want us to be mindful about the amount of resources we're going to do that. And if we don't start seeing some growth, what does accountability look like?
All right, Chris and then Maya.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing this change to us. I think one of the things that I've been encouraged in talking to staff in the schools is that people recognize that this change is needed. I don't think I believe there's a consensus that this is the direction that we need to go. I think that the question is if not this, then what? And we talk sort of vaguely about alternatives to suspension and what we're going to do instead. And looking specifically at the addendum that you gave us, I guess my question is in addition to deciding what we're going to eliminate in all those graphs and tables and in the behavior education plan, or what we're putting a pause on, can we add the alternatives to suspensions that we know have worked? Because we've been doing this for a while. And at the K-5 level, what I heard is that we have some of these alternatives in place already. Can we add that to the addendum so that there is some consistency as we start to implement this in the schools? I guess one of my concerns is that if that's not in there, are we going to get 32 different responses in 32 different schools? Or how do you see that rolling out?
Yeah, I can take that. And I think maybe Sherry will want to jump in, but I think in terms of policy, right, and what you all pass as policy, and then what we do as guidance to implement that policy, they're both equally important. I think putting a very simple, clear policy that you pass that's an addendum to the BEP is the right approach. And then we report back to you on the guidance that we're giving to schools, and that you in your oversight role as the board make sure that we are providing consistent support to schools. And I know Leah spoke to this a little bit in her opening, and I know we've been gathering input already from so many schools and different roles in schools about what they need, and that will be going into the guidance and training that supplements, again, what's already in the BEP, and like you're saying, lifts up best practices. And so I think the best practice is to pass a succinct, clear policy addendum, and then to continue reporting back to you all on the guidance and the progress that we make in supporting schools. But okay. I totally agree. They're both equally important. I think it's just sort of the roles of the different mechanisms as I see it.
Yep. And that completely makes sense. I guess my question then is, will the guidance that is going to schools be ready once we pass the policy? Because those two pieces seem to be like they need to be working in tandem right away in order for us to be effective in getting that consistency and guiding schools.
Definitely.
Okay. And so you'll share that with us through a weekly update, or how will we get to look at that?
I will defer to Leah, but I'm sure there's a great way we can get that to you. Yes.
We'll work on that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Another question that I had is Leah, I really appreciate you opening and describing the comprehensive look that we're going to take at the staffing needs in order to implement this, and just really making sure that the staff have the support that they need. I mean, functionally, I've been thinking about this. We're in COVID right now. Those strategies that my colleagues have described where students are moving from classroom to classroom, like you can't functionally do that right now, whether it's a good idea or not. There are things that we can't do because of space and because of staffing. I mean, right now, some of our schools are still short staffed. So do you feel like we're ready and you can support 32 schools in doing this right now?
Yes, we do feel ready. We are looking at two different ways of thinking about this in the short term. Both, how can the people who are situated in their current roles support schools? And then also, are there any unallocated positions that we're not going to fill where we could temporarily shift resources if need be to support this? So we're looking both at what is our own internal capacity already and what might be the capacity for small amounts of expansion or support beyond that for this school year. And then a much more comprehensive view and look will be presented to the Board of Education in the winter when we think about budget amendments.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. And then last question, in the out of school suspension and in the BEP elementary, both of those policies have a component of parental involvement. So notifying parents when there's an issue or something's happening at school. Is that still going to be, is that a component of the alternatives to suspension too? And what, it does seem like families are a crucial part of problem solving and being a team with the school staff. How will that continue to work that way?
Yeah, and I'll say, like, on a technical level, that's part of what we track in EduClimber, is that family communication piece. And then, yeah, I don't know, Leah, if there's anything else you want to say, but I would say that's already a routine part of what schools are doing, even prior to any student being out of school suspended, are already, engaging with parents.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate the answers.
Maya?
Yeah, I'll just make my comments brief because I feel like, what Board President Ollie said and some of my other colleagues have mentioned the importance of ensuring that, we have the professional development in place and that we're ensuring like our students are not going to still be overly disciplined and such. So my only question is, how are we utilizing our community partners to possibly help with some of the shortage, but also provide some of the training? I know I heard the Racial Justice Summit. Are we sending teachers, sending administrators there? Because also too, it's not only our teachers who are also exhibiting these behaviors when it comes to suspending children, it's also our administrators. So our principals doing some of this, are some of the other staff doing this. In addition to the Racial Justice Summit, is there other venues like, I don't know, I'm thinking of like Nehemiah's program. I'm thinking of like Urban Triage. I'm thinking of some of our community partners that we already have in place to help us navigate that, not only in the capacity of teachers, staff, and administrators, but also families, and giving families support that they need to be able to work through whatever things that are going on, because we know a lot of our children who are being suspended are also just going through normal things with their family or whatever is going on in their household. So how are we making sure that we're wrapping around completely for teachers and staff, but also for families, but utilizing our community partners?
Maya, those are great questions. And frankly, some of them also live in the world of suggestions that we will take and bring back to our team. The way that so from the Student Staff Supports Department, the way that our model typically works is that we work with our internal team to really build their capacity around whatever it is we're training on or focused on. So let's use the YWCA Racial Justice Summit for an example. That particular opportunity has had an incredibly positive impact on our team, our schools, and our community. And so we send folks to that every year. My entire department of student and staff supports had the opportunity to go this year. And what we try to do is take our learning from that, those opportunities, in those learning opportunities, and try to take back what we learn and create internal professional development, capitalizing on what we learn from those folks, but also then partnering with those individuals or those speakers or those change agents to think about what that would look like in our school. So we have, I guess, a train the trainer model is the best way to describe it, where our team is constantly going out, getting new information and coming back and bringing it to our team to understand and build into tools and resources for our schools. Right now, a lot of our professional development is done through this idea of like a really a tight coaching model where we're in schools side by side and in conversation with our student services teams. So generally, we look to those opportunities as a train the trainer type of model. I can't speak necessarily to principals or other groups in the training that they're getting around racial justice and behavior, racial justice outside of the behavior world. But I can tell you with confidence that I know that as an organization, we're committed to being anti-racist, and all of our professional development is rooted in the mindsets around race and equity and ensuring students belong in our schools. We also are always open and interested in collaboration with our external partners and thinking about how we leverage learning in our community and leverage folks in our community that have expertise. So we have specific partners around restorative justice, for example, but those are concentrated more at middle and high school. So to be honest, right now our major partners exist around social emotional learning, restorative justice exists at different levels of the organization. And so we actually need to take a step back and think about what our elementary needs are in terms of partnership and collaboration and have a real conversation about what that might look like. So thank you for bringing that into the space.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. I would just add just a portion to that, just that, you know, if we can find ways to navigate that now while our children are young, it's not as much of an issue as they get older, because they are learning those pieces young and in a developmental stage. So I would just advise to go fast track on that and start really working on that piece and build that out, because I do think that is important if we're going to pass this. I mean, I'm in full support of it. I don't think this should ever had existed, but I understand that, you know, this is a bold move that we're going to be making, but we also need all the pieces in place to make it, ensure that it is equitable across the board. So thank you.
Gordon, I want to give you a chance to speak up if you wish to. Oh, Gordon had to go. All right, Gordon is no longer here. Has spoken. I just had one question. First, I'm not going to repeat what's already been said. I'm in full agreement with this. Suspension doesn't work, and I really appreciate everybody's voices tonight and the wisdom that you shared with us. I have a technical question, however, and that is about our expulsion policy. So elementary expulsion is incredibly rare. Like, I can't remember a time it happened. However, there is a statement in our expulsion policy that requires suspension as part of the expulsion process. I think it's statement 10 in that policy, basically says that a student shall be suspended for 5 days. And I'm wondering if we need to tweak this amendment very slightly, just to state except in circumstances of expulsion, so that if someone were to be expelled, we wouldn't be like in a situation where we like have one policy saying you have to suspend them and another policy saying you can't. We handle that one.
I think it's
So oh yeah, sorry,
Okay.
Nikki, you can go ahead. I'm probably going to say what you're going to say.
I was saying in the gun, I thought it was state law on expulsion that it must be raised.
So that, yeah, in that extremely rare, right, instance, I actually think the statement at the end of the addendum that says all other responses will say the same will cover that if that situation were to arise, and then state law applies to that response of expulsion, which then includes the 5 days. So I don't think we have to amend the language, and we did think about that. But thanks for raising it. It's really important to make sure we have everything technically sound.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it. All right, are there any final comments on this addendum before we move on? Thank you so much to everybody for this really important conversation and for being so bold and raising hard topics that other districts probably are not talking about yet.
Chris, I do have a statement,
Yeah.
comment. Let me say just, first of all, thank you, to Ms. Stanford, to Bryn, Dr. Esser, and to Dr. Hicks for even coming forward with this, idea of discussion in terms of us looking to do a moratorium, and I appreciate the board, all of your comments, and I just want to say to everyone that this is going to have to be a collaborative process as we're going through this. It's one thing to say it in words, another thing to execute it, and there will be times when there would be a degree in collaboration, tension, as to what it is, and I don't think I want us to leave missing the whole idea of some of the causative. There's no secret to the intersectionalities between being a Black male and being one within IEP and being overly suspended, as we have started our system in just the regression of how the humane side of it when we began to integrate our school. And that still plays a part as today when we walk out of here and we see our students. I also want to lift, there are a few adults who are doing the majority of the suspensions, and that's going to be a conversation that's going to come back to this table, because as you look forward to try to educate and then you try to eradicate individuals who will continue to perpetuate those things that are bringing harm, that's a tough conversation and action must be taken. So when Mr. Castro brought up accountability, accountability is accountability. And I think we do everything that we can. We just come out of a collaborative problem-solving model with MTI on Friday, and I felt really good, and I think that we're in a great place moving forward. But our true collaboration will happen in situations like this. We profess wanting to be on a journey to being anti-racist. Well, it's not just in words, it's in action. It starts with policy. Policy influence practice, which impact our people, which are our children. And I ask that we all just keep this in mind as we move forward. And we want to be bold. There are things to be bolder about, to bring about. What we all seeking to do is to give equal justice to every single child and every adult in our district. So I want to say thank you right now for the support, but I'm telling you, leaning forward together isn't easy work. And so let's prepare ourselves for it when we have a bump in the road. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to move us on to our next policy, which is our budget transfer policy. You'll remember that this policy came to us in June, and at the time we asked for more information. We received that information. So Ross, if you just want to take a minute to frame this, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Great, thank you, Board Member Kersey. As you stated, we did discuss this last at the June Operations Work Group prior to Kelly's departure. And I wanted to make sure to put together some type of information or memo that illustrates some of the reasons why we're seeking a language change in this policy. And I outlined that in the memo attached to the board materials this evening. Essentially, I'm trying to tie it to two key themes, and I'm paraphrasing from the memo itself. I'm looking specifically for identified language or errors in the current policy that cannot be enforced, and technical limitations of the policy as written that impede budget work instead of guide budget work. And as we look through the revised policy, a lot of redlining, and that is intentional. Specifically, I want to address each item in turn in the memo, and we can certainly open it up for questions if we have any. The item A marked between the following funds, 10, 21, 27, 30, 38, 50, and 80. I indicated in the memo that this is actually erroneous language and does not really serve a purpose in administration of the budget. Transfers between funds, especially budgetary transfers, are for the most part impossible. For example, some of these transfers I outlined in the memo between funds 10, which is our general fund, and fund 21, which is our donation fund, don't make any sense because we would be mixing revenue limit funds with donated funds. So a budgetary transfer between these two wouldn't work. Similarly, we have two major debt service funds in the district, Fund 38, which is our non-referendum debt, and Fund 30 or 39, as it's more typically called, which is our referendum debt. Budgetary transfers between these two are literally impossible, so they make no sense to enumerate them in policy. So that's one of the reasons I identified that in policy to be redlined. Additionally, where it's stating between MMSD departments as reflected in the budget, I wanted to make sure to provide a little bit more narrative around this section, just so that we can have some intentionality about what we mean by these types of transfers. Each year during budget presentations and deliberations, we talk a lot about equity projects. That there have been other names for them over the years, and we included some examples of that in the revised policy language. But the intention of this rewrite of the policy is to give the board members input to when we have substantive changes to any of these large scale projects that the board is already intimately aware of as part of the budget development process. For example, we had a lot of work that went into our ESSER 2 planning for this school year and forward, in addition to some local initiatives for letters implementation, mental health services, and virtual programming. So again, the goal of this is to make sure that those substantive changes or deviations from what's presented in the approved original budget come before the board for further discussion if and when there is sufficient cause to revise it at those times. Under item C, where we have between the following major functions, this is currently the most problematic language. And I didn't mention this in the memo, but in the language in the existing policy, one of the functions identified at the top there where it says 11000, that's actually not even a real function. So that is actually a typo in the approved policy. But aside from that, the changes between functions is not a representative sample, either in a change of a budget or a project that's being utilized by the district. It is more a way of the way we are forced to code them to comply with DPI, state and federal regulations. So I put a couple of examples in the memo itself. One, it applies directly to our ESSER 2 policy. So many of our technology purchases were directed to use function 295000, but that doesn't mean in all cases we need to use that. It's just used for the majority of administrative technology purchases according to Wisconsin Uniform Financial Accounting Requirements, more commonly called WUFR. When we went to go enter our ESSER 2 plan with the federal team at DPI, we discovered that while we had planned to use that function, it was not available to be used in the federal WISE grant portal. So we had to pivot and recode that item to a 221500, which refers to instructional technology. At that point, in my opinion, you're kind of splitting hairs, but this is the way that the state requires us to code things. And when they issue new coding guidelines annually, they love to rewrite what those functions are to be used for and in what circumstances. So many of those changes between functions do not change the purpose of the budget project we're enacting, but it does change the way it needs to be coded to comply with those regulations. And then finally, down to the granular level at the buildings, according to the way the current policy is written, if a principal we're wishing to make a supply transfer in their budget between the art department and the Phi Ed department, under the current policy that we're now stating that would require a supermajority of the board to make adjustments. And that, to me, that seems egregious. That seems unnecessary in terms of what the principal is doing to run their building versus what types of adjustments should be brought before the board. I guess there is one more item here, I'm sorry. The last item D indicates transfers from the contingency fund. This does not apply as the district does not maintain or has not maintained a contingency budget in all the years that I've been with the district, frankly. So this does not need to be there. Aside from that, a lot of the language I do submit for further questions, but if you have any questions on the memo itself, I'm happy to answer those as well.
Thank you, Ross. Any questions from the board? I've got one. I know that when we discussed this in June, one of the questions one of the comments that came up was about transparency. Yes. Would it be possible for the board to get reporting on budget transfers? And I know it's possible for the board to get reporting. I'm wondering if we want to put some kind of statement in the revised policy saying that administration will provide the board with quarterly reports of budget transfers.
You're correct. We did discuss that in June, and to that effect, I'd be happy to include the details of those types of activities in our quarterly updates that we already provide the board. And if we need to adjust the way that reporting looks or is received, we can certainly talk through that at future times. More than happy to do that.
Great, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, this is along the same lines of what Chris said. Do any of these changes, are they going to make it harder for the board to see what's being transferred and what's going on? Is there anything that we could miss as a result of changing this policy? I mean, obviously the policy was put into place by previous board for some reasons, and I understand how the coding doesn't make sense and all these things, but is there something that we could potentially miss by making these changes?
I don't believe so. Again, this does give us actually more ability to be transparent in what we're doing and how we're administering the budget. What I don't want to do is have the budget make it sound as if we need to bring every minute change to the board. But in those quarterly updates that we would provide, we can certainly discuss those either in briefings or if we need to during consent or open session, however we prefer to go through that, just to make sure that those are understood. Now, I will tell you, just like reading the check registers or any of the regular financials, it can be pretty long and long form, and there's a lot of numbers on there. Again, happy to provide context to all of that, but it will read like the matrix is going through your brain as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, thanks, Ross. I appreciate that. And I do agree with you on the granular level of the building level needing a super majority for the board to approve doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And so I do appreciate your work on this, and yeah, we'll look forward to figuring out with you how those updates would look that would be useful for the board and not, overburdensome on you too.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Nikki?
Yes, one, I have to agree with Ross. I think it would be negligible, the amount that we could miss. I would like personally if it was discussed in an open session just for full transparency. Yes, I understand that it's like watching tape, right, sometimes. At the same point, I don't want to be questioned on not being transparent on where our money is. But as for missing something, I've read it multiple times. I'm not seeing where we're really going to miss that. And this was put in place before me, I believe. I think it was before 2017, but I am not positive.
I believe the last time the policy was revised was 2003.
Yeah, so this was way before me. So I have no idea the purpose of it, but I believe that as long as we're open with the numbers in an open session, I don't think we're going to miss anything if we did this change.
Thanks, Nikki. And I just want to clarify that even with this change, if there was my understanding is if there was a major shift, like if we were to take some money that had been put into one equity project and shift it into another one, that would still come before the board, correct?
Yes, my intention would be if we're doing a major revision to either ESSER 2, or if we're doing a major issue revision to the BEP. I heard Leah say the word transfer, my ears perked up. I said, oh, okay, this might be a chance for us to enact that type of a review where we'd want to actually be intentional about how we're using our dollars for large scale projects like that.
Thanks for that clarification. Are there any more questions from the board?
I just have a question about partnerships. So if a partnership becomes unsustainable and therefore funding that was dedicated to that specific partnership is no longer being utilized, would the reallocation of that funding be brought to the board as something we need to reconsider?
That is a fair question. I think a number of our partnerships have been tied to past equity projects and priority actions. So if there was another use for those funds that needed to be identified and the board wanted to discuss that, we could certainly fit that within this policy if needed.
Okay, so I'm thinking very specifically in terms of ESSER funding. You have a partnership within ESSER funding that is no longer going to work out. How do we reassign the value of that partnership or the value of the resources that were supposed to be part of that partnership? How does this policy allow for us to enact that process?
Okay, good question, because we are currently in the process in the revisions of the fall budget, looking at the ESSER 2 plan, how some of the projects have evolved, and some of the adjustments that need to be made either to satisfy the existing scopes or the newly realized scopes for some of the projects that we previewed in June. So my goal is to bring back the revised ESSER 2 funding amounts that have come to fruition. And if after the board approves the original budget, we identify that one or more of those projects, either the scope needs to be expanded, reduced, or as you're suggesting, possibly even removed, we could, as a group, look at the entire schedule revise the amounts tied to those projects, either within their existing amounts or pull some back to be held for future awards, either within this fiscal year or in future budget years during those development times. A similar process that we would use when we were looking at the TID schedule actually is a good example. So in years past, when we had the TID projects, anytime there was a change to those projects, those were things that were discussed with the board and previewed with them at that time, to my understanding.
Thank you so much for speaking to that, Ross.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much, Ross. Thank you, Natalie, for your work on this. And we will be voting on this at the end of October, correct?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to our next policy. The next policy for our consideration is the former camera policy, which has been retitled to the surveillance policy. And Sherry, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Chris. So tonight we're here to talk about two policies. The first one we'll be looking at is the surveillance policy, which is 6702. As Chris noted, I did change the name to be clear of exactly what the policy entailed. I will note that I did receive some helpful comments and questions from board members prior to tonight, and I'd encourage other board members, if you have comments or questions, to please send those to me, as it'll give me an opportunity to review them before this comes up at the regular board meeting for a vote. This is the first foray into our new cadence with regard to policies. Our attempt is going to be to get most of the policies to you a month before they're actually voted on at the regular board meeting, so that once we reach the regular board meeting, you are in essence just voting on the policy that has been uploaded to board docs. And that way we're making a clean record and everyone knows that the policy they click on is the policy that was voted on, is the policy that's in the policy manual for the district. With regard to this current policy 6702, the comments and questions I received, I can answer those now, as I think it'll be illustrative of the process that I hope to go through with the board with regard to policies. I welcome high-level discussion. Know that before the final policy is presented, it will be gone over with Dr. McGregory's team, the communications team, to make sure we are properly communicating what it is we're trying to say, and that all errors will be corrected before the policies are posted. And that helps you know that, we are continuing our work on these policies to make the best policy guide and handbook that we can have. With regard to both policies, one of the questions was, how will staff and students and families know about these policies? Each year we put out a policy guide, and I think specifically with these two policies is important. One, because they are being updated and will be newly updated. It's important that those policies do go into the family policy guide that is sent out at the beginning of each school year. In that guide, the full policy is laid out for review. And if there are any questions, parents and families and the community are directed where they can go to get more information about the policies if there are questions. With regard to the comments that I received for tonight's policies, most of them or all of them were with regard to 6702. One of the questions dealt with the use of the term non-discriminatory, in that it was indicated that cameras would be placed in a non-discriminatory manner. And the question was, what does that mean? It means that, and I will state this in the policy, that it is in accordance with our policy 8012, which is our non-discrimination policy. Additionally, it is in alignment with our practices to ensure that all of our schools are equally equipped throughout the district with the items and services that they need. And as such, cameras should be placed equitably throughout the district in all of the schools as set out in the security plans. There was also a question about the list of areas where cameras could or could not be placed. Just for the board's information, when I do a list like that, it is not exclusive, meaning that there are other areas that may fit in. However, that's by way of example, as we can't list every possible example, because I'm sure if I think I list everyone, someone will come up with one that I didn't think of. And then a question was asked about either naming specific staff or titles that would have oversight over the placement of cameras or the retention of the images that were recorded or being able to see what was recorded. Because typically districts go through a number of iterations of titles and people, I'm reticent to put that in a policy per se, because then it's automatically violated once the person that's designated is no longer with the district or that title no longer exists, which is one of the problems I believe we ran into with the prior policies. However, as I've indicated to the board, we will be, for each of these policies and all subsequent policies, putting into place a departmental and district-wide guidance on how to implement the policies, just as spoken to by both Ross and Bren with regard to the policies they brought forward. And so in that vein, we will be looking to work with the superintendent to and other administrators to designate who has access to what when. With regard to the storage of the video, again, I'm hesitant to put a number of years, given that technology changes, laws change, and I don't want to put either you or the administration in a position where we create a policy that is broken because we've placed a number of years and no one remembered that, oh, we need to check the policy to make sure that we're following our own guidelines. We have a number of storage capabilities within the district. As you may know, we're coming from a time when floppy disks were the way they were stored, right? And now we've advanced to cloud storage, and who knows where we're going after cloud storage. So they are stored. There's always documentation about where they're stored. If anyone wants to know how or our methods, we can certainly disclose that. But to specifically lay that out, we may run into issues again with being true to our own policies. And I think that is it. Yes, I think that covers all of the questions that were presented. And again, my goal is to, have some high level conversation with you and determine how to make this process work most smoothly for all of us, and to ensure that, once the policies are presented at the regular board meeting, what is posted is what is voted on.
Sherry, Nikki.
Just a couple questions, Sherry. I know most laws have statute of limitations. I always saw our policy as being like a statute of limitation. So this is going to be different in that we will renew it every year, so we don't need to have a time limit. I'm a little confused on that.
No, what I'm saying, sure, Nikki. What I'm saying is to place in the policy, for example, that we would keep all video for 10 years. That's kind of hard to do because technologies change. We may go with a different vendor that has different storage capabilities. We may have different storage capabilities from time to time. And so I don't want to tie us to a particular time frame for storage because I can't predict that. I can predict that it'll be stored for some period of time and that our tech department will be able to tell us what that period of time is, but that for it to be in the policy, I don't think is necessary at this point.
My second question is, well, on hidden cameras, this is opinion more than question. It's only come back to bite us twice so far. I'm not sure I want anyone to have permission to hide a camera, no matter what, in the circumstance. I mean, technically they say in extenuating circumstances. What, in this case, the extenuating circumstance did involve our high-level staff.
Right. So when I'm
And
thinking
I'm
extenuating
sorry about that.
circumstances, the definitions I'm thinking of are vandalism to school property. And then they're still not hidden, Nikki. We're not doing hidden cameras. All of the cameras will be visible. It's just, if it's an area where we typically don't have cameras, I want the superintendent to be able to direct in those instances that a camera be placed to try to remedy an issue that we're having. And it could be that those cameras, once we've remedied the issue, they immediately come down. But I think if we don't give the superintendent that ability, we may find ourselves in a situation where, once again, we'll have to come back to the board, try to get a vote to implement an action. And I want to make sure we're keeping safety in the forefront, especially during the current times. And it would be difficult for us to act quickly without that. But in extenuating circumstances does not include hidden cameras.
My problem with the issue, if I may, Chair, if I may, my problem with it is that I think the board needs to know if a camera is going to be placed. I think we need to be read into it. I think it does affect policy, because we're the ones who are going to be the ones that are going to take the blame if a camera is found. It's assumed that we do know. And in this situation, I think that we have to know. Because if you look at at statute 118 through 120, it says the school board's policies should be construed liberally to involve anything that is not prohibited or illegal by state or federal statute. In this particular situation, it's not limited by state or federal statute, and it could end up causing, one, on the vandalism, cause Fourth Amendment problems on evidence on how we keep it, and number two, we could end up getting sued for something that we don't even know about. Sorry, I'm not yelling at you, I'm just frustrated with society in general. So if I came out wrong, please forgive.
Sure, Nikki. I think I understand what you're saying. And what I'm saying is not that you wouldn't know. I'm saying that I can't put every circumstance in the policies, but you all meet regularly with the superintendent. And, you know, in those meetings, of course, you would be read in, or it could be a session for a closed session. However, it would not be such that the superintendent would not be sure whether or not it would be something that he could do. There are areas of the school that are not camera, of course, right? And there are camera plans that have been established that show where the cameras, the visible ones, the ones that are planned, are placed. And so it would be in those instances where a camera is going to be placed outside of our camera plan. And you know, that would take, first of all, to figure out where that would be that's not camered already, and to ensure that there wouldn't be any hidden cameras. There wouldn't be any cameras in locker rooms, or anything that might be considered a restroom or like a locker room. And so I think I understand what you're saying, but there might be a need to have a little bit of flexibility for the superintendent in his role to have his staff start conducting an investigation without necessarily having talked to the board, at least extensively at first.
I understand what you're saying, and I respect that. My problem is this: I trust you. I trust Dr. Jenkins, but the last two superintendents I had before him didn't read me in at all on anything on the hidden cameras. They didn't read any one of the board in. How do I know it's not going to happen again? That's my feeling. No, that's all I've got.
Thank you, Nikki. Ananda?
Thank you so much, Board Member Carusi, and thank you so much, Board Member Vandermeulen, for speaking to the complications of this policy. And I'm gonna be honest, like I was First, I want to say thank you so much, Sherry, for working on this policy. I'm really sincerely trying to understand what are we trying to do with this policy and what we're trying to do with cameras. Because we have had over this past couple years. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm hearing my voice a couple times. The last couple years, conversations about cameras, and what I have, my sense from those conversations and what I have heard from our my colleagues was that we did not want to have cameras. But now it seems like we have this policy that begins by stating that we need cameras. I don't want to paraphrase. I want to speak directly to what the policy say. That is saying that electronic monitoring equipment are necessary to provide a safe and secure environment. And I'm trying to reconcile with that statement alone and the tone that follows that. And I'm just gonna be really honest. If we cannot provide safe and supportive spaces for our students without cameras, I don't know, what are we doing? I don't want to be a part of that, to be honest with you. I don't want to be a part of a school or a district that finds necessary monitoring and surveillance in order to have a supportive learning environment. That's number one. My second point is that, I'm reminded of Professor Jacqueline Boges out of UW-Madison. About 6 years ago, there was a pretty comprehensive report around surveillance cameras, body-worn cameras from police officers. And Professor Boges interviewed many different members of our communities, groups that have been institutionally, historically marginalized. And there's a whole section on her body of work that talks about false sense of security. That's what cameras do. And I don't understand what are we trying to do with camera. I'm really confused. For me, it needs to be, this policy should say, no, we don't want cameras, and that's it. We don't want cameras in our staff. We don't want our cameras in our students. We don't want our cameras. That shouldn't be a thing that should be happening. Learning should be happening. Education should be happening. Growth should be happening. Community building should be happening. I feel like we get into the spaces where it become incongruent. We're short of justice, but we also want cameras. I must be really honest. My daughter have encountered so many different situations in the school district in her lifetime of being a student. All the times that she has been hurt, a camera has not helped her. In fact, in many cases, it was because a lack of camera video evidence prevented her from accessing, any sense of justice or any sense of care or love or respect or dignity. So I'm going to continue to listen to this conversation. I'm 150% opposing this language, and I'm not even in support to figure it out, tweaking this language, because I think the sentiment of the policy itself is already very incongruent to restorative justice, is incongruent to learning, it's incongruent to holistic education, it's incongruent to the community building, anti-racist practices that we're trying to do. So thank you so much.
Chris?
I was just wondering if Sherry wanted to clarify that at all.
I don't think there's anything to clarify.
Okay. I was just thinking that the conversation that we were having before, it was a comparison of the idea of hidden cameras, which that paragraph number 4 gets into, versus cameras that are visible and in public spaces and things like that. So I think that was the difference. The one question or a few questions that I had was, when we're talking about, surveillance and switching this to electronic monitoring, I do think, having cameras is one thing. Where the information goes is another thing. And like you explained, Sherry, it's a different world than when this policy, whenever it was previously written, was done. And I'm just wondering if there's a way to put more general language, maybe not the specifics you were talking about how many years it would be maintained or things like that. But is there a way to put in some general language about the fact that it's the electronic monitoring too, not just the physical placement of cameras? Does that make sense, that question?
So electronic monitoring, are you talking like some of the software that's on computers, or what do you mean by, I'd probably need to define that. So.
Yeah, I'm just trying to recognize that it isn't just about physical placement of cameras. It's about more, when you're getting into using electronic surveillance, or when we're doing that as part of safety in our schools, like knowing where that goes and who sees it. I mean, we have that very specifically in that fourth paragraph about extenuating circumstances. I'm just wondering if we can add something more general to the end of that. And I don't know what that would look like. I guess I would have to think about it a little bit. But
I get what you're saying. So you're talking about our general safety ecosystem and how we're maintaining that information that we gather, however we do through that system.
Yeah,
so sure, clear. I could put some thought into it and think about how we could craft it such that we don't get ourselves in trouble again because, we hire a vendor that does something different than what we initially had when we enacted this policy. And yes, your earlier statement about the difference between cameras that are already there and hidden cameras. Again, we are not placing hidden cameras. And so I don't think that at this point that is on the table at all. And certainly we can take out the information about extenuating circumstances and we will move forward as necessary. And you will have to be briefed if there's anything that needs to be done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate the conversation that just took place. I very much agree with the concerns of my colleague, Nikki Vandermeulen, and thank you for speaking to that, Nikki.
Okay.
I want to share Ananda's opinion that we should not be starting this policy off with a statement that we need surveillance technology for safe schools. I'm paraphrasing badly. I really think that just starting out saying that we're committed to safe schools and that this policy allows the use of surveillance technology as part of school safety is a much, a non-opinionated way to start out a policy. I think a lot of people would argue that surveillance technology, we don't need it to have safe schools. It actually detracts from the safe environment in our schools. So I would avoid, I would change the beginning of the policy as it's written right now. I really appreciate, Sherry, you're bringing up that the technology for storing images or surveillance is going to be radically different the next time we visit this policy than it is right now. I also think that the technology we just used the surveillance technology we're using is also going to be radically different 10 years from now than it is right now. And this policy, I think, needs to anticipate that. First, I would, instead of using cameras, I would just use the word surveillance technology throughout this policy so that it is more broadly applicable to whatever comes down the pike in the next few years. I would also broaden the statement about discriminatory placement of technology to also include that we don't use technology that has racial bias built into it. Like, we don't use facial recognition software in MMSD or any other technology that could add to discrimination in our district. I think that's really important. The fourth paragraph, I just thought it implied the use of hidden cameras. I'm glad to hear it does not, but please make that clear. Just the layers of approval that are suddenly required for extenuating circumstances just made me wonder, these hidden cameras, and that's why you need so many layers of approval. I also would spell out the types of extenuating circumstances that this would be allowed for, like vandalism or other criminal behavior makes sense. There are other activities that cameras have been used for that do not make sense. So I think extenuating circumstances to me was a little bit too vague, and I think I'd like to see more specificity about when we might be able to have that special placement of cameras, such as vandalism or, theft, things like that. I also, I sent you a whole bunch of other edits on this policy and some questions about what we might want to add to it. I know it's a little bit more of a practice than a policy, but I think putting a sentence or two in here about how we're going to ensure that everybody sees and understands this policy might not be a bad thing to do. And I also wonder if we want to put something in about what happens when surveillance recordings become part of a disciplinary action. Do they become part of the student's record? That's something we want to spell out in the policy to protect students.
Are there any other questions on this policy?
Just a request, Board Member Carusi, may I?
Yeah.
I just sent an email as well to have this policy go through an equity analysis, because I think that we often don't see the unintended consequences of that. I mean, I did have a question, Sherry. I mean, you may not want to answer or don't have an answer. Is what are we trying to do with this policy? Are we trying to regulate the cameras that we already have? Are we trying to increase the cameras? Are we trying to get catch students' behavior? Are we trying to catch staff behavior? I'm sincerely like trying to figure out what's the intention of this policy, because to me, I want to the sentiment that I had from conversations around camera is to make sure that students have a privacy, and then staff have privacy, are respected, and that we're not in the situation where people don't know that they're being recorded, or in places and in situations. I mean, yeah. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Anand. And that made me think of another comment I had. And I wonder if we need to include something in this policy to cover surveillance technology that could be installed on district laptops or other district devices, to ensure that that's clearly spelled out in policy as well.
Okay.
Because of all the changes that are being recommended to this policy, I know we have a packed agenda in October, and I'm also wondering if we will want to see this policy at one more work group meeting before we vote on it. Folks have opinions about that?
Are you asking?
Yeah, I'm asking the board.
The
Like,
board,
if we would
if
like to see this one more time at a work group meeting before we have to vote on it, or do we feel comfortable just moving to a vote at the end of October?
Given some of the adjustments folks spoke to this evening, that I really do think would allow for this to be a far more adjustable policy. I think it makes sense to continue to discuss the policy and to see those altercations reflected before we move forward in terms of voting. I think it's possible to do that, to see the policy changed and to have that conversation in the regular board meeting. But I am open to continuing the discussion in another work group.
Maybe one way to address this would be, Sherry, if you could share the revised policy with Sabian and Chris, who is our policy team. I wonder if then we should give you guys the power to decide if you think it needs to come before us again at Ops Work Group, or if you think we're able to go forward with a vote. Would that, Chris and Sabian, would you be up for that?
Yeah, I'll say right now, my inclination is to say we need to put this in another work group meeting.
Okay.
To reframe the policy in general, because I feel like there are some theoretical underpinnings that we need to modify.
I'm in agreement Fernanda just asked us to take it through an equity analysis, which I think
I
of all the
completely agree
things
with that.
would, I was just sitting back and waiting, because I think this camera situation in terms of trying to just restore trust, not only just amongst us, but in the community. I think we need to take it through the greatest amount of scrutiny to come out on the end where we all could feel very confident about it at the end of the day. And I appreciate Sherry bringing this forward. I mean, we had to have something to react to, right? And I think we did. And a lot of things came out here this evening. I think we need to take our time, bring it back to a work group. And if it's not sufficient then we still need to go back and not rush it, but let's just get it right. There are a lot of things to consider from the past and for the future as well. So I'm inclined to agree with
Well, I think we've reached a good point. Sherry, thank you so much for bringing this forward. The former policy was unworkable, and these improvements are desperately needed, so thank you, thank you, thank you. Sabian and Chris will continue to work with Sherry on revisions to this policy, and it sounds like we're pretty much in agreement that this should come back to operations work group in October. So moving on to the locker room policy, are you ready to do that, Sherry?
Sure. There weren't that many changes to the locker room policy. I just rearranged, and some of the procedure I actually moved into the policy in alignment with, what the board had directed on prior occasions. And I did not receive any comments from board members about this one.
Any questions or comments on the proposed locker room policy? Sherry, I just had one writing comment, and that was the paragraph stating except as provided herein, and the following paragraph about documenting facility conditions. Looked like, it was hard to tell this in the red line version, but the way it was organized looked like that applied specifically to the media, and I think it just needs to be organized in a way so it's clear that that's not just about the media, it's about everybody. And then my other thought on it was just, I looked at locker room policies being used by other districts, and the thing I noticed was that they're a lot shorter, that ours a lot shorter and simpler. And I don't know if that's because we're just a more complicated district. This is true of Milwaukee as well, like much shorter, simpler locker room policy. And my one wondering about that was because I think we're legally required to post this policy in every locker room, and we hope people see it and understand it, is a longer policy going to make transparency harder?
So Chris, when you take the red lines out, it's actually only a page. So it's in alignment with the other ones. I know Milwaukee does use a smaller font, but this tracks pretty much what they have. I did add a couple of things that we had. If the board doesn't want to have the special MMSD language, I'm fine with that. That is completely up to you.
No, I thought the content was more than fine, what she had in there. And yes, others could be shorter, but I wanted to try to make sure that it was fitting our needs and given our situation. I think we need to be clear, and I thought it was clear, the content.
Okay. Chris, I see your hand.
Yeah, just a couple of quick things on this. In number 6, it says for purposes of this policy, emergency is defined. And we actually took the word emergency and non-emergency out of the paragraph before. So I think just to clarify, I think we put in like a demonstrated need instead of non-emergency or emergency up there. So I think that we just need some language clarification there if we're going to define terms that we took out. So that was one. And then I'm just wondering on number 4, it says, no person may use a cell phone, wireless communication device to transmit, transfer an image of representation of a nude or partially nude person who is in a locker room. Does it matter if they're nude, partially nude? Does that leave it up to an interpretation? Can we just say any person?
It's the statute.
So it's like statute language. Okay.
Yeah.
So we can't just say any person in a locker room, like you can't have.
I have to model the statutory language.
Okay. Thank you. I just thought that might clarify it if we just say not in a locker room. And yeah, then if we also just, if we're moving procedure, up in the top paragraph, there's just policy and procedure up there. And so.
And there's another one further down I noted too, so.
Okay, thanks, Sherry.
All right, are there any other comments from the board or questions about the proposed revisions to the locker room policy? Again, thank you so much, Sherry, for bringing this forward to us. This was very badly needed, and we appreciate your work on this.
Thank you, Sherry.
All right, so our final agenda item tonight, which should be quick, is just a listing of the topics that we'll be discussing at Operations Work Group for the remainder of the year. And I just wanted to open it up in case anybody had any comments or questions about the topics we'll be discussing over the course of this year.
I just want to thank you and Ross for the work that you've done in collaboration to, get our operating work group kind of on track for this next year. And I think it's relevant to distinguish the areas of focus that the board emphasizes versus the real business that this work group, I shouldn't say real business, but the business is obligated to do as a function of our role as board members. And I really appreciate balancing, as the chair of this work group, the different areas of interest board members have expressed with, the work we take up within this work group in regards to policy and in regards to balance as we move forward.
Dolly? Chris, question. Hey, Chris.
Yeah, I just had a couple of things that I'm just wondering if they're missing or if we might need to add them in at some point, and maybe it goes into a regular board meeting. Maybe the operations work group isn't the right place for it, but I'm wondering about things like the employee handbook, HR and staffing, and then we did a school safety update a couple years ago in operations work group too. So just where those would fit. Thanks.
Yeah, I wrote those down. I want to agree that I felt like HR was noticeably absent from the topics we'll be discussing, and I'm actually wondering if we need to have an HR strategy conversation before we really get into the thick of the 22-23 budget. And if so, we need to carve out some time for that because our time is actually pretty limited. We don't have a December ops work group meeting on the calendar because it's a very short month with the break. I know we're going to be talking about HR a little bit at the board retreat, I think. But I do feel that HR is an important topic that this work group covers every year. And we're going to need to add, I think, potentially handbook discussions to the agenda. And I'm also wondering if we do need an HR strategy conversation before we dive into the January budget. And if so, we might have to do some rearranging.
Yeah, let's come back and have that conversation.
Okay.
Definitely have.
I also have another question just about, we have a lot of policies on the agenda this year for both work groups, which is fantastic. We have a lot of work we need to do. And I'm wondering, what's the process for working with Chris and Sabian, our board policy team, to both bring policies to the board and then revise policies based on board comments? I think it's unclear what their role is and at what point of this process specifically they get engaged in working on policy revisions that come to the full board.
I don't know if this is one of those things that it's not noticed, it's not an item, and then we can't talk about it, but I think that is a fantastic, I was wondering that myself. And I'm wondering if that question and that conversation, and then also what items to be added to here can be put into like our retreat, because I think we're going to have a very intentional retreat and more things are going to come up.
Yeah, so Chris and I are in contact with Sherry and Dr. Gregory, our district chief of staff, to set up a standing monthly meetings to discuss all of the flow that will be, that'll be flowing through the work group every month. So I think that will be be a space and time for us to provide input and feedback, so that the board is ready to vote for final adoption of any policy by the end of the month. Certainly has been a, yeah, I mean, it's been a hard-working process. You know, our staff have a lot going on, but I'm fairly excited that we're getting this standing meeting on the books.
Thank you for that, Sadie, and I think the pre-work that you guys are doing is going to make the agenda for this work group and also for instruction work group run more smoothly, so I really appreciate the time you're putting into this process.
And if you ever need an extra person, if you get over workload with everything, you or Chris or anyone, I'd be glad to step in for a meeting if you need us out.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. All right, anything else on our topics for the year? Great. Seeing none, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, 7-0. Thank you, everybody. We finished before 9. We achieved my goal. And safe travels. I hope everybody gets home before the rain kicks in.
All right. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Night.
And thank you, Dr. Jenkins, on agreeing to give you a ride.